Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting of the California Board of Accountancy to order. My name is Michael Savoy, President. I'd like to start with the roll call, starting with Felicia.
Alicia Burhow.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Carola Nicholson.
Kathleen Wright.
Katrina Salazar.
Mark Silverman. George Familet.
Michael Savoy.
Sonny Youngstown Park.
Jose Campos.
And with that, we have a quorum. The CBA's mission is to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with established professional standards. This mission is derived from the statutory requirement that protection of the public shall be the highest priority for the California Board of Accountancy in exercising its licensing, regulatory, and disciplinary actions. Whenever the protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, protection of the public shall be paramount. You may notice that our board members are referencing tablets during the meeting. The tablets allow the board members to more easily access meeting materials and are not being used to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item without the board's jurisdiction. First item on the agenda is discussion and possible action to make non-substantive changes to Section 18, Title 16, California Code of Regulations, Division 1, Article 3, or Section 26, Title 16, which is the California Code of Regulations. And I'm not going to say any more. Mr. Bone, please take over.
It's quite a mouthful, Mr. President. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be batting leadoff today for the board meeting. Currently, Mr. President, the CBA has two sets of regulations that pertain to practice privilege. The first is contained within Article 3, and it implements the CBA's current mobility program, which allows qualified out-of-state licensees to practice in California without providing notice or paying a fee. These current regulations are set to become inactive on January 1, 2019, coinciding with the sunset date of the statutory authority for the CBA's current mobility program. Senate Bill 795 would make the CBA's mobility program permanent and is currently working its way through the legislature. The second set of regulations are contained within Article 4. Those regulations pertain to the CBA's prior practice privilege program, which required out-of-state licensees to provide notice and pay a fee before practicing public accountancy in California. The Article 4 regulations are currently inoperative. Today, Mr. President, staff are asking the CBA to approve the changes to CBA Regulation Sections 18 and 26 as indicated in the attachment to this item. This would grant staff flexibility to pursue either change depending upon whether Senate Bill 795 is signed into law or not. Now, if it is signed into law, as we expect will occur, the CBA would pursue the change to Regulation Section 18, which would make permanent the regulations for our current mobility program. If SB 795 is not signed into law, then by statute, the CBA's prior practice privilege program would go back into effect on January 1, 2019. In that case, staff would pursue the proposed change to CBA Regulation Section 26, which would restore the regulations for the prior program effective January 1, 2019. Absent action from the CBA come January of next year, the CBA would be without any regulations pertaining to practice privilege. We would solely have our statutes in place. This is because the current mobility program regulations are scheduled to become inoperative January 1, 2019. A lot of numbers there, Mr. President, I understand. But that concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to provide any further clarification.
So this is protection just in case.
I move approval of staff's recommendation.
Second.
Any
Question.
other questions? Sure.
Yeah, question. I've asked this before, and just so assuming the sunset date's removed and we continue with the current mobility program, we have a mechanism by which we can revert certain jurisdictions to a notice program if for some reason they fail to continue to meet all the mobility pieces. So are we saying that despite Article 4 being inoperative, we've repeated whatever relevant regulations within Article 3, I guess, to provide for that old notice program?
So the bill, SB 795 that's moving forward right now, Mr. Campos, kind of enshrines that policy in statute that would, in case a state falls out of compliance and the CBA would have the authority by majority vote to require notice and fee from those individuals. I'm not 100% certain off the top of my head where that stands from a regulatory standpoint in Article 3, but I know when it comes to the statutory authority, sir, that is going to be preserved if the program is made permanent per that bill.
So I'm, it doesn't change the motion at all, but I think I've just been curious to make sure that should we encounter a situation where we have a jurisdiction that we put back to the old program, if you will, that we have the mechanisms under the regulation that are going to allow us to then operate for them under that old notice type of mechanism. And I think I had the understanding that it's already baked into the new current mobility portions of that, but I just don't know that for sure, so.
Okay. We will verify and report back, sir.
Any other questions, comments, any public comments? Call for a vote, please.
Alicia Burhow,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson. Yes. Sunny Youngsun Park,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
and Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
Okay, passes unanimously. Next item is a discussion of possible action regarding the progress of the development of the proposed framework to monitor the California peer review population. Mr. Francella.
Thank you and good morning. So for this item, it is requested that the CBA review the recent correspondence between the CBA, CalCPA, and the AICPA, and consider the significant observations regarding statistical information relating to the California peer review population, and provide feedback and identify any concerns that the CBA wishes the PROC to consider and discuss at its meeting on August 17th. So in your materials for attachment 1 is the letter that we sent out in January requesting a February response. CalCPA's response is in attachment 2, and CalCPA kind of really more defers on the statistical information to the AICPA, as the AICPA has kind of corralled peer review back, centralized it more, especially through what's called their new PRIMA database, and most of the statistical information that we'll be seeking will probably be coming from the AICPA going forward and less from CalCPA. And in attachment 3 is the AICPA's written response. And in it, Mr. Brackens acknowledges that the CBA, the ratios of firms to team captains in California is significantly greater than the national average. He talks about the AICPA's efforts to strengthen and grow the peer reviewer pool and provide information. He also provided information regarding the 7 proposed data points that we were seeking information on. And staff have highlighted some significant observations that may affect the peer reviewer population in California, especially related to must-select engagements. There appears to be a heavy reliance on a very small number of peer reviewers, and it's uncertain, at least from the information that is provided, that how the peer reviewer population can absorb or will be able to absorb this population of peer reviews should the peer reviewers cease to provide. You have a bunch who would do 1 or 2, and then you have nothing in the middle, and then a heavy reliance on very few number, especially in the must-selects. I think 2 people do, or 2 peer reviewers do a heavy volume of the peer reviews. And as you can see, over the last year, they lost 15 and only gained 7. So we have some concerns as to whether or not the population is going to get backfilled appropriately and how the AICPA is going to address that. I do know on a national level, the peer review board for the AICPA is doing a lot of discussion on this. I believe actually California is one of the driving forces as to why this has become more of a national topic, because we are inquiring to ensure that there is a sufficiency of peer reviewers. Staff have highlighted a handful of questions that we've identified. We're taking this to the PROC in August to get their input and try to flesh out a fuller framework and inquiries back to the ACPA. But as the CBA itself had generated the initial letter, we wanted to provide this body an opportunity to provide any additional feedback or questions they wish to have asked prior to the August meeting, so the PRC can evaluate that as well. So with that, I will turn it back over to President Savoy, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
So action is request the CBA recently corresponded. Is there any, I don't think there's a motion required.
No motion required, just if there's any additional information the CBA wishes the PRC to consider.
Hey, Kathleen.
Thank you. Two questions, and they might both be, quote, dumb questions, but I'm too old to care, Dominic, so. Question number one, are the peer reviewers paid?
Yeah, they're paid by the peer review firm. They negotiate a fee just like any other client.
And that's up to the peer reviewer to negotiate the fee? There's no fee schedule or anything along those lines?
No schedules, it's market driven.
That might be a point for consideration. Secondly, does the AICPA have a committee that is addressing this issue, and would it be appropriate to have a member of CBA be involved with their committee, since they seem to be the one managing the process?
They have what's called a peer review board. I don't know if they have a special task force addressing this, but the peer review board is their, kind of like the CBA is to the accounting profession, the peer review board for the ICPA is over the peer review program. We attend, generally when I say we attend, we telephone in because they're out of state most times, and we participate and listen in if we wish to kind of get more involved. Our next set of letters could go to the board itself as opposed to Mr. Brackens, where we have been communicating, because he's the staff vice president over peer review at the ACPA, but we could direct more attention to the peer review board itself and our concerns. But most of their meetings take place out of state, so the way we participate is through the PROC members attending and dialing in and participating that way.
I'm just going to go ahead and jump in. When the peer reviewers, when they come off, have they given any feedback as to why they may not want to renew, or is there any incentivizing that we can help them with in order to kind of to come back? Because that's been an issue that this is what I was concerned about last year.
So two responses to that. One, AICPA has been somewhat reluctant to share any survey information they're collecting as to why peer reviewers, if they're even collecting it, they've been pretty clandestine in terms of letting us know, because they believe it's privileged and confidential information related to peer reviewers and why they're leaving. And secondly, in response, anecdotally, we've been hearing a lot of peer reviewers are getting out of peer review because, or at least out of the must select, because of the risk. And it's actually increasing insurance premiums for some of these individuals. And so they're kind of getting out of those niches that are causing them increased risks of concern of getting kicked out of the peer review program as the peer reviewer, that they're not meeting certain peer review standards. And so they're kind of backing out in that way. But it's more anecdotal that we've been hearing than anything substantive and empirical.
Questions? I believe if you're looking at a reduction, remember when the Department of Labor came before us regarding 401k or retirement plan audits, and they'd ask the peer review firm getting peer review whether you did these kind of audits, and they'd say no, and that came back to us. Now you're finding peer reviewers may not be qualified to review those kind of plans if they're being done.
You put at risk too.
So that increases the risk as well. So some of them, if they ask the right questions and find out, and if a firm does a retirement plan audit, that plan has to be selected to be peer reviewed.
Right.
It would be a sample, but if they only did one, that one would get, so I think part of the reason you're getting a reduction is that
Right.
as well.
Yeah, it's
Katrina,
risk.
you had a question?
My comment is that I would like to offer to work with staff. I'm a new newly appointed member to the AICPA State Board Committee, and this question and concern might be something that I can work with staff to move forward, or at least ask questions at their meetings if I am authorized to attend, although I can certainly maybe ask questions by phone, but I'd like to offer to assist
Thank
the
you.
committee and the staff.
Much appreciated.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you so much. Next item, discussion and review of proposed, Dominic, don't go anywhere. Of responses to the 2018 Sunset Review Report.
Thank you. So this item is being provided to offer the CBA an opportunity to consider proposed content for inclusion in the CBA's 2018 Sunset Review Report. For those members who were on the CBA as it prepared for its previous Sunset Review back in 2014, you'll probably notice that we've employed a different process for CBA review. Previously, the CBA would review a fully completed report, probably around in September, provide feedback on that report, and finalize and approve the report at its November meeting. For this sunset, DCA and legislative staff have made it clear the board should be more active in the development of the Sunset Review Report. So to ensure that the CBA is meeting that directive and has a more active and visible role in the narrative and messaging portion of the report, staff have developed a process to provide for increased input for the board, from the board. And so back in March, the CBA reviewed and provided feedback on content for inclusion for two sections of the report. It was Section 10, board action and responses to prior sunset issues, and Section 11, we identified a new issue. For this meeting, staff have crafted most of the narrative content of the Sunset Review Report, which includes responses to the information requested and questions raised by the Sunset Review Committee. By exposing proposed responses at this meeting, it will provide the CBA 3 opportunities, July, September, and November, to shape the narrative it desires to present to the Sunset Review Committee. For this iteration of the Sunset Review, staff have provided responses to most of the questions in sections 1 through 9 of the report. There are some questions staff continue to prepare, which we've identified in yellow highlight as members review the report. Additionally, for the tables that do include statistics for prior fiscal years, the data for the 17-18 fiscal year is current through May 31st, so 11 months of the data. So in developing this initial narrative, staff drew on various meetings the executive officer and assistant executive officer attended with legislative and DCA staff, and from observations gleaned from Sunset Review hearings the legislature conducted in 2018. And 6 areas were identified as topics of either interest or concern by the whole committee or by select members on the committee. And these included enforcement processing timeframes, enforcement of unlicensed activity, drug diversion program, continuing education audit, automation or breeze, and staffing. Lastly, legislative and DCA staff have emphasized that the Sunset Committee wants to hear directly from board leadership and members, with the executive officer available to assist in responding questions as necessary. This again is a change from prior years or prior sunset in the practice of how the CBA historically handled testimony on Sunset Review hearings, where the CBA president would provide some general opening remarks, and then the testimony about the report was primarily driven and provided by the executive officer. So for discussion today, staff are requesting the CBA provide comments and direction on the responses prepared in the report. These responses are the message the CBA really wants to push and illustrate regarding its activities over the prior 4 years. One of the themes staff have focused on throughout the report is an emphasis on consumer protection, the board's consumer protection mandate, and we've been working diligently to integrate that into many of our responses as appropriate. Members will notice that there is considerable duplication when responding to certain questions throughout the report. So if you read it in totality, you'll see a lot of that repetition, but this is intentional. We have responded to questions in a manner that ensures that responses can stand alone if necessary. So if certain committee members are certain Sunset Review committee members know there's certain questions that they're most concerned with, they can get a full picture of the board's response and not rely on having to jump throughout what will eventually be a couple hundred-page report when all the attachments and other documents are provided. So my plan today for presenting the report is to kind of go section by section, highlight any important questions or requests for information that was provided by the Sunset Review Committee, and especially those that align with those previously identified 6 topics. Again, those are back on page 3 of your agenda item. And as I complete each section, I will turn it back over to President Savoy and be happy to answer any questions members may have. So in your attachment, beginning with section 1, section 1 of the report, which starts on page 1 and runs through page 23. This section covers a really broad, wide range of topics, from a high-level overview and history of the CBA and the profession it regulates, information on the CBA, its members, and its committee, major changes, including statutes and regulations affecting the CBA, various accomplishments and studies undertaken by the CBA since the last report, and organizations that the CBA belongs to. So I'd like to kind of jump to page 9 and direct members' attention to question 3 regarding major studies or major changes in statutes and regulations. This question and request for information takes up the majority of the written response of section 1, and it provides really the first opportunity to form a strong overall narrative around the CBA's activities over the past 4 years. For major changes, staff have highlighted the restructure of the enforcement program, successful completion for implementing the mobility program, relocation of the CBA office, succession planning, strategic planning, and leadership changes. As enforcement processing timeframes are an important topic for the Sunset Committee, staff have made improvements to the enforcement program a focal point for this section. Staff have also included implementation of the mobility program, as this was a significant change to the regulation of the accounting profession in California that occurred at the tail end of our prior sunset and continued in earnest over the past 4 fiscal years. As it relates to strategic planning, the board will be undertaking a new strategic plan at September meeting, so I anticipate we have a narrative crafted right now, but it'll be more fleshed out after the strategic plan process in September. Moving on to pages 14 through 20, staff have highlighted a listing of the statutes and regulations that have affected the CBA. For the various regulation tables, the area of status will be updated in September to reflect the current status of the various regulatory packages presently in the rulemaking process. Lastly, rounding out question 3, staff have highlighted 3 studies undertaken by the CBA during the 4 fiscal years. Staff anticipate the studies will be appended to the report, so the narrative included is designed to act kind of as an executive summary of the nature and findings and outcomes of those various reports. The report related to peer review, that section will be fleshed out more after the September meeting when the board has an opportunity to look at the peer review report. With that, I'd like to turn discussion back over to President Savoy for any questions and comments and feedback on section 1.
Yes, Katrina.
I have 3 comments on this section. The first one is more of a question just for staff for you to consider. Is there a way to bring into the write-up on the completion of implementation of mobility, or somewhere in here, the positive impact that travel has had with allowing board members to participate in events? And that might be the ED conference or the legal conference, or so it's just an idea to think if there's a way to sort of highlight the successes, the way the allowed travel supported the successes in here. I just didn't see a direct link. It could be anywhere. So comment 1, and that would be for future discussion. Page 20, could you clarify where it says describe major studies conducted by the board? Right under the table, it says CF period, section 12. What was the CF?
Honestly, I don't know what CF stands for, but section 12 of the report is all your appendices and attachments. And so you'll provide all the written reports.
I I
at the
guess
back
that'd
end.
be my question, is that a typo or is that a thing? And if it's correct, then I have no questions. I just had no idea what that
Yep.
meant. And then on page 22, I'd like to add a committee. I am on the Committee on Relations with Member Boards. And that is a NASBA committee. So it is the Committee on Relations with Member Boards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question as well.
Yes.
On page 7, for the attendance, fiscal year 17-18, I'm not on this list, and I should be for some of these meetings.
Thank you.
So in terms of section 1 here, first on, I guess I'm in section 1, what is this? You're highlighting stuff. Question 3, I guess, major changes since the last time, and you talk about the mobility program, and I thought it might be worth at least ending with something, and I don't know what's appropriate in here for a sunset review, right? But clearly the concept of ongoing monitoring is gonna be a topic. And so this talks about what we've done, what we did to get to implementation, but there's probably a need to acknowledge the ongoing effort on, you know, what we're doing now. There's not a lot of definitive stuff to put in there, but I think it'd be helpful to sort of include that as an important element here.
Absolutely.
And then secondly, regarding, I agree with the topics that are on here in terms of mobility and enforcement and relocation, succession. What about outreach? And there was a concerted effort by probably the board since the last time on doing things on campuses, using that as a forum to educate potential new licensees on protocols and process, and you have that
Yeah.
later in the document, but I think there'd probably be worthwhile having some headline in here on that part of the strategy.
Absolutely. I think question 3 is a excellent place to put that. That's your first opportunity to really get a message going. So if that's the message, we're happy to put that in there.
Kathleen?
I wasn't sure if this was section 2 or section 1, but since Jose brought up a similar comment, I'll go ahead and make my comment as well, which is, I would like for the board to consider whether or not a focus in the strategic plan on outreach to licensees would be appropriate. In section 2, it does talk about outreach to anybody, the public, and including, of course, licensees, as being part of the overall objective, but the mission statement focuses on enforcement, and my question then comes back to, what do we do with respect to customer service related to licensees? Not prospective licensees, but licensees that currently have a CPA license and are registered with the board. Suggestions might include a speakers bureau, interested parties meetings, technical advice memorandums responding to technical questions raised by licensees, and/or publication of documents such as frequently asked questions with respect to practice and ethics, and particularly where the rules of CBA are different from the ethical standards of Circular 230 or the AICPA. So I just toss that out there as a consideration for an item to be included in the strategic plan if the process is starting again and rolling forward for the next year.
Thank you. Questions? Any other comments?
Thank you. So section 2, this is on pages 24 and 25 of the report, concern performance measures and customer satisfaction surveys. The performance measure information, which is question 5, is really just a request for all the reports and performance measures that the board has, and we will put that in the appendices on the next iteration. Question 6 is the only one that requires a narrative response, and so for this section, staff have really tried to place a strong emphasis on creating a distinction between the two surveys that kind of exist, because that caused us, there was considerable dialogue at the last sunset. We even had an issue that came out of it, ensuring they were basing our customer satisfaction survey on the DCA developed survey as opposed to the CBA developed survey. So we're trying to create a pretty big distinction between the two. And so the CBA stakeholder satisfaction survey is a CBA developed and managed survey available on the website and offers respondents the opportunity to provide feedback on a wide range of CBA program areas. The DCA consumer satisfaction survey is DCA developed and managed with a very narrow focus. This is for individuals that filed enforcement-related complaints. So specific to the CBA survey, on average, 81% of the individuals indicate satisfaction with the services they received, 82% are satisfied with the CBA staff, and 89% are satisfied with response times. The negative comments that the survey generally bears out relate to lack of technology, specifically paper-based applications, license renewal, and payment system. And obviously, we're moving towards establishing a credit card payment system in the future, which hopefully will address some of these concerns. As for the DCA Consumer Satisfaction Survey, the CBA has experienced an increase in satisfaction levels from 45% during the prior sunset to 67% during this sunset period. I believe much of this is increased satisfaction related to better case management, especially at intake with initial contact, where initial contact is made with the individual, and we do a lot of telephone contact with these individuals with the complainants to understand their complaint, make sure we have a full picture, and keep them informed along the way. So with that, I'd like to turn discussion over on Section 2, back over to President Savoy, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions, comes, Katrina?
On page 27, at the top of the page with the bullet points, there, after Communications Division, there's a colon and a blank, so I just would like to point out, looks like maybe there should be some cost basis information following that.
Sorry, what section are we on?
Or delete the colon. Page 27 at the top, at the bullet point. So there's just some formatting there, but it looks like there's a phrase that still needs to be added, or delete the colon.
I see what you're saying.
So I couldn't tell which one it was. And then on page 33, again, non-substantive change, but for year 15-16, it looks like proposal should be singular, not plural, at the bottom of the page. So it's just removing the S from proposals. Thank you. Page 27, or I'm sorry, 33. I'm so sorry, no, you can't find it. 33, and it's the for year 15-16.
Any other?
They had a Section 3 apparently.
I'm so sorry. My bad. I'm gonna blame it on.
Would you like me to move to Section 3?
Yes, please.
All right. So Section 3 are pages 26 through 36, and focus on fiscal and staff issues. A couple of items I'd like to highlight, beginning first with question 10. There was a calculation error in that table specifically related to dollar amounts for interest accrued. The total amount, I think, shows about 2.6 right now. It should be 5.6 million, so I apologize for the math error. And so question...
The county board made that error.
I didn't use Excel, sorry.
Yeah, really.
Question 12 is a question that focuses on Breeze and contributions made. Again, Breeze is a topic of interest with the Sunset Review Committee. We've included a table for quick reference on the monies contributed each fiscal year and noted that DCA has informed the CBA that it will no longer have future Breeze-related costs. On page 3 to 35, staff have addressed staffing-related questions that are, again, one of the focus areas of the committee. Question 15, that begins on page 33, discusses various budget change proposals. Again, budget change proposals are the mechanisms that are used to request and secure additional staffing and funding. The CBA has submitted, we've identified all the ones that we submitted over the prior 4 fiscal years. These identify the number of proposals submitted and whether they were approved or denied. Excuse me. And again, question 15 on the bottom of page 34, and which carries on to the top of page 35, discusses the CBA's reliance on temporary staffing resources. Again, this was kind of matches a new issue item that the board discussed back in March. The response to this question highlights the CBA's need for sufficient staffing and funding augmentation to have full-time positions. So with that, I'd like to turn discussion back over to President Savoy. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions, comments, section 3? All right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So questions, so I probably, when I read the responses at questions 8 and 9, I think there's okay, maybe this is not appropriate to have in there because maybe everybody understands the saga or the journey we've been on, but we have fees at certain levels because of very specific actions that took place. And I thought that some of the context that maybe is needed in here is there were specific actions by this board to reduce fees
Right.
twice based on prior sunset review recommendations, right? I mean, we were basically being taken to a very different reserves to be held, and so it's probably a tricky little thing to navigate, but we didn't just decide to reduce fees because we wanted to.
Right.
There were some very specific actions with the idea that those would return to a certain level, and so I think that's probably understood by these parties, but I think there needs to be something in here that captures some of that history, and it's probably spread between items 8 and 9. And then the second thing I would say on that is, we have a current proposal out there to do that, and we need to go through rulemaking, or we already did, whatever. Somehow I think, need to capture that is out there, and we obviously have to wait and see what the results of that were gonna be. But important with that is, we held off on doing that primarily because we were precluded until the situation with the loans got resolved. And so our loans were funded back to the board at a certain point, which then really created the situation or the certainty under which we would pursue those fee adjustments, right? And so there's a timing issue there, because somebody could look at this and say, well, what were you guys thinking? And especially if your projections are doing this, and so somehow we need to capture that.
And as members consider the audience, it's not just the Sunset Review Committee. This goes on our website, so it's important that we flesh out for anybody who's coming on for the first time looking at our board and wants to understand. So I think that's a very good suggestion.
Anything else, section 3? Moving along.
Section 4, which begins on page 37 and runs through page 51 of your attachment. For questions 17, 18, and 20, these are under construction and will be presented as part of the draft of the CBA reviews in September. Questions 17 and 18 are kind of trend analysis questions, and staff believed it was best to wait for the totality of the final fiscal year to close prior to drafting that narrative. As for question 20, this was a new question that we actually got the final questions from the Sunset Review Committee, or DCA, I believe, right at the very tail end of the narrative that we were drafting, and so we repopulated it to match what they're asking for, but we hadn't prepared a response to question 20, so that's why that's not responded to at this time. So the primary area within the licensing program narrative I'd like to draw members' attention is question 32, and it's back on page 48, and it carries through to page 51. Again, one of the topics of interest for the Sunset Review Committee focused on CE audits. These pages focus on the continuing education requirements and the CBA's efforts to ensure licensees are adhering to those to these requirements. And in the middle of page 49, under, I guess it's subsection to question 32, subsections A and B, the narrative provides information on the steps the CBA takes to verify CE. And the CBA uses 2 programs to verify, the CE Worksheet Review and the CE Verification programs. CE Worksheet Review is performed on 100% of license renewal applications and examines self-certified CE information reported by licensees. And CE Verification is a random selection of licensees to submit documentation substantiating completion of the CE. 32C and D are detailed responses to consequences for failing to adhere to CE and statistical information on CE audits. I know it's missing a little bit on that one table, and we're going to be filling that in for September. So with that, I'd like to turn discussion back over to President Savoy, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions on section 4, Jose?
Yeah, couple of questions. On page 41, I guess we're in question 21. We talk about the fingerprint requirement. We say we waive some fingerprint requirements. Would it be helpful to add some context on what kind of numbers we're talking about, or what percentage of our population we're talking about? I assume this is a very small population for which we waived or we do not have fingerprints on file.
It's not an insignificant number, because inactives do represent about close to 30% of our population. So I believe we can provide input on how many fingerprints we collected, or I think we were capturing that statistic for a period of time on the enforcement activity report, and we can probably provide some increased tables to show the workload and what we've collected during that window.
Okay, no, so that second paragraph there, I guess, that second paragraph on page 41 is really just getting at, to the extent you're inactive, retired, or what have you, there is no requirement to do this, and so that is waived for them. Okay, that is fine. And do we comment at all on that portion of the population where they are required to provide and we do not have fingerprints currently in place?
No, actually, we don't. So we can definitely flesh out what the consequences are for individuals, or what we do in terms of citation and compelling individuals to renew when they renew without fingerprints.
Okay, because I jumped to that with that paragraph, but clearly I teed off the wrong piece. But I was curious when I read that information as to what that meant. And then similarly, we talk about on page 42, those countries where we have mutual recognition. Some other document you have for the current meeting gives us a sense of how many of those we're talking about. It might be good to give context of how many countries, are part of this, or even naming the countries where we have those mutual recognition
Absolutely.
Agreements with. I think that's all I had on this section.
Katrina?
On page 47, under school approvals, question 49, since you'd mentioned that people might be coming to this without a lot of context, can we define or clarify BPPE? I just didn't see it elsewhere in the document, or maybe I missed it, but if someone goes to schools, they might scratch their head.
Yeah, so one comment I probably should have made, and I missed this acronym, we pretty much disregarded the use of acronyms throughout this entire doc unless the question had the acronym in it, but we should have spelled out Board of Private Post-Secondary Education. But you'll see we spell out continuing education, you'll see we spell out Attorney General, so we kept that in mind as we wrote this document to not make it so governmental, I guess. We tried to lessen some of that as best we could, but thank you. I'll make sure to go through, and if that's referenced, I'll take care of it.
And then my other question is on page 48. It's 32 under practice-specific continuation ed requirements. I might be misreading this, but at the bottom of the first paragraph, it says licensees that perform preparation engagements complete 8 hours and specify continuing education. The paragraph at the bottom says licensees, the same sentence, but it's 12 hours. So if that could just be clarified, because it reads as though it's, to me, maybe the same sentence with different numbers. So I was just a little confused by that section.
Sorry, so I can make sure I get the right note. Under practice-specific continuing education, the last sentence, additional licensees that perform preparation engagements,
Right.
says 8 hours.
It says 8 hours.
And so where do you want me to go?
The
And
very
then if you
last
go to the very
sentence.
last sentence on the bottom of that same page,
12 hours,
Under the next
it
section.
says
Okay.
12.
yeah.
Okay, I'll retool, yeah, they do take 12,
Okay.
it's 8 and 4.
Right,
So
but
I'll
there's
I see
nothing
what you're,
that-
yeah, there's no connection, got it. Thank you.
I scratched my head, but there's something else maybe that's needed in there to.
Yeah, that's not a
the
problem.
ethics
Got it.
piece or whatever, it's something.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's it, thank you.
Yeah, which includes both ethics and Kathleen.
On page 48 and 49, under the continuing education requirements for licensees, bottom page, I guess the last sentence of the last the second to the last paragraph on page 48, it does reference teaching and publishing, not specifying that there's a limit on the number of hours, but my question relates to, wasn't there a modification of the regulation that we did approve as a board on the publishing? And I'm not sure if it included the teaching, but I thought it did include the publishing.
It did include publishing, and so it's part of the rulemaking. It hasn't gone through. It's part of the rulemaking that I think it's a separate rulemaking, apart from the nano and blended learning. We brought a proposal forward and was approved by the board. But we can definitely reference that there's set limitations for that teaching and kind of alternate CE.
Okay, I'm not quite sure I understand. I don't want to belabor the point. We can talk separately, but I saw nano and I saw blended, and that's what then brought to my mind the
Right.
fact that I thought had also talked about the publishing requirement and had made some amendments there too. And I then thought possibly this is where those amendments should be discussed, but now you're suggesting the amendments never passed, or
No, they did. They're just
Oh.
not in, neither nano and blended for that matter. They're not
fully
fully,
operational.
so I'll just add another header under there
Okay.
and identify that increased
Okay.
hours for publication.
Okay. Anything else, section 4? 5? Okay.
All right, so section 5 begins on page 52 and concludes on page 64 and focuses on the enforcement program. Similar to the licensing section, the first two questions are under construction as they rely on full fiscal year data to properly respond and perform the necessary analysis to create that and draft that narrative. There are a couple of questions I'd like to draw members' attention to. First is question 35, and it's on page 57. The four-year fiscal year period comprising this report represent the highest disciplinary totals the CBA has experienced. By way of comparison, last sunset review report for the 4 fiscal years that made up the 2014 sunset review, the totals were 22, 26, 58, and 34 respectively. The CBA has experienced increase in the numbers of actions it's taking and ongoing efforts. We believe this is tied back to the CBA's ongoing efforts to improve caseload management and active collaboration with the AG's office. Next, I'd like to draw members' attention to question 40, which is on page 60. And this responds to a topic that the Sunset Committee showed increased interest in during the recent rounds of Sunset hearings, specifically related to unlicensed activity. In responding to this question, staff have highlighted how it handles investigations related to unlicensed activity, and those that we look at as well as unlicensed activity are post-discipline action after the board is either revoked or accepted a surrender of a license. For unlicensed activity that's not post-discipline, a focus is placed on compliance to address this unlicensed activity, either through getting the individual firm licensed or the individual or the firm licensed, or working with non-licensees to address advertising materials so that they're in conformity and not in violation of California law. With post-disciplinary matters, when the CBA has revoked or accepted surrender, staff regularly review the internet to determine if an individual is still practicing or using the CPA designation. We try to get them to either remove it, or in some instances, if they don't, we'll refer it to the department's Division of Investigation to determine whether or not they're practicing public accountancy without a license. With that, I'd like to turn discussion back over to President Savoy, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Kathleen?
In light of the comments that you just made, are we totally convinced that the increase in the number of enforcement actions is related to CBA's more enhanced, I mean, it was always good, but enhanced conscientious and efficient administration of the enforcement program, or rather, the point that practitioners are just not well prepared, that they are not fully knowledgeable of what the rules, regulations, and so forth are, and that they are accepting client engagements for which they're not fully competent to administer. In my sense, that, I think, with the overwhelming complexity of rules and regulations out there that the accounting profession has to deal with, may be equally as much of a cause for this result than a more aggressive enforcement. And I have no basis for making that statement other than I'm in education and I do a lot of continuing education seminars and am surprised somewhat at the knowledge base that I have in the audience.
I guess from my perspective, the majority of the increase is due to caseloads. We've had a high inventory of cases. That inventory has stayed constant, and we've adjusted internally and the efficiencies internally, and we're seeing the output from that. I can't say what's feeding into it isn't exactly what your concerns are, but at least from where I sit, many of the improvements were a direct result of this board's direction to make sure we're managing our cases more efficiently.
Patty?
Well, and I think if we look at the enforcement division report, the activity report, and we look at the number of complaints, that's not going up significantly, the actual new complaints coming in. And so I think that, again, speaks to what Mr. Franzella is saying, is it's more of the output on the efficiencies internally. I think if that were the case, we'd see the number of complaints being opened increasing, and we're really not seeing that. It's held pretty steady, and actually has gone down just slightly.
Because the way you would address the other issue, I mean, what is the issue, and then how you address each issue is a different response. But thank you.
But partial answer to one of your questions is I've been on the board for 8 years, and in the beginning, an awful lot of breaching fiduciary responsibilities. Now we're seeing more, for lack of a better word, incompetence.
Yes.
People doing what they should not be doing. And that, so from that perspective, I think the paradigm has shifted a little bit, and which requires either education or don't do what you shouldn't be doing.
Both of which are standards, so to speak.
You would think.
Yeah.
Question 42, the citation activity, and I seem to recall peer review reporting and all that was big, but maybe that's outside of the period that we're looking at now. It's now other things that are driving.
Yeah, the peer review citation period ended with that last sunset review, where
Okay.
the numbers were like, I don't know, 1,300 citations or something of that neighborhood.
Okay. And then on question 48, we cite some figures on cost recovery. And I'm just curious about the roll-up of these numbers. Is this cost recovery on those that are going to be a continuing active licensee, or does that also include cost recovery on those that's only assessed or payable if they choose to reinstate or what have you?
Yeah, it's none of the deferred costs. It's only those that the board ordered, or either through the stipulations or that were adopted via proposed decision. So it's the kind of that, I guess, set aside cost recovery, we don't incorporate into this. That should they reapply or seek to petition the board, we don't calculate that number.
Should that just be commented on in here? So this would exclude then cost recovery that really is only, I don't know what the right word is, payable or what have you, upon reinstatement or something like that, or at least say that it excludes any cost recovery that may appear in disciplinary orders.
Yeah, so it excludes both those that stipulated settlements, which is pretty common that you set that aside until they come back, and on defaults. There's no cost recovery that we associate with defaults. We identify what our costs were, but not, that's not even set aside, you just don't collect that. So I can add that narrative, that's not a problem.
Any other? Yes.
Non-substantive change, just on page 56 at the top of table 10, enforcement aging, there's a cased closed, which maybe should be cases closed, second column from the right. It's in the blue, it's right below the blue.
Okay.
Anything else on 5? Moving ahead to 6.
All right, so section 6 covers public information policies, and it's pages 65 through 67 of the report. Much of the responses in this section relate to the CBA website and various social media platforms used by the CBA to ensure the public is informed. The most substantive and longest narrative for this section is question 58, which centers on outreach. Again, this is a primary focus of the CBA, which is featured prominently in the strategic plan. Staff took to providing a robust narrative to emphasize the CBA's activities in this area. I will be taking this information now and replicating it in some form to move it up into question 3 at Mr. Campo's request. But with that, I'll turn it back over to President Savoy, and happy to answer any questions members may have.
Anything specific on 6? Okay. 7. Section 7 on page 68 focuses on online practice issues. This section is comprised of only one question, question 60, and focused on online practice and unlicensed activity that may stem from unlicensed practice. This narrative centers on the fact that the online, we've taken it to mean that, we've centered our narrative around it's pretty commonplace for CPAs to have online practice, but we do address unlicensed activity to provide a consistent narrative related to the unlicensed practice activities that we saw back in section 5, and used a very similar response. And with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to President Savoy and happy to answer any questions. Yes, Kathleen?
This is a question, and it may appropriately belong somewhere else, I'm not sure, but that is, would this be an area to address what set of ethical standards someone who is licensed by multiple professions should adhere to, at least pursuant to the CBA's requirements? The ABA, the American Bar Association, has specific opinion letters on this. In other words, if you're a lawyer and you're something else, you've got to comply with the legal ethical standards, period. And if you got to comply with other standards too, you've got to figure that out, but you must apply with the legal standards. Do we have anything like that with respect to a CPA that would perhaps also be a doctor, perhaps also be a lawyer, perhaps be a licensed fiduciary? I don't think a CPA can be a notary public, but I've never understood why.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head that precludes or in some way
Well, the ABA standards conflict, no doubt about it, because the primary standard for the Bar Association is to protect your client, is to advocate in behalf of your client. The primary standard of the accounting profession is independence, and those conflict.
We do have a section, it's broad, that says licensees must comply with all applicable professional standards, but it doesn't go specifically to dual licensure.
I just mentioned it. That's-
Anything else on 7? Okay.
All right, section 8, pages 69 to 71 of the report deal with workforce development. There are 2 questions in this section that are under construction. Question 61, and that deals with impacts of licensing delays, and question 63, which deal with barriers to licensure and or employment the board believes exist. These will be brought back to you in September. One question I would like to highlight is question 62, related to the CBA's efforts to work with schools to inform potential licensees of the licensing requirements and the licensing process. Again, as outreach is an area of critical importance to the CBA and shapes much of its outreach activities. Staff have highlighted the various activities performed over the past 4 fiscal years, with special attention paid to the meeting the CBA held at CSU Fullerton last September. So with that, I'd like to turn discussion back over to President Savoy, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anything on 8. Okay.
Section 9 is page 72 and is titled, headed as current issues. One of the first question, I think it's question full punch, so 65, deals with drug diversion. This is a topic of interest for the Sunset Review Committee, but as the CBA is a non-health board, the CBA doesn't have a diversion program. The last question in this section, question 67, deals with breeze and IT needs. As we will be fleshing this out and more fully in our new issues section in section 11 of the report. Staff want to ensure a consistent message for dealing with business modernization needs of the CBA. Therefore, this question is under construction and will be brought as part of the next iteration of the Sunset Review in September. So with that, I'd like to turn discussion back over to the President of the Board.
Any questions on this section? Okay.
So the remaining 3 sections, sections 10 through 12, again, will be provided when you review the next draft in September. I would like to highlight some new issues in section 11 on page 74 have already been highlighted beyond the initial one we brought to you in March of staffing. Again, we'll focus on the staffing, but there'll also be one on automation and online service. That is business modernization. An increase to the statutory minimum for license renewal fees, because with the board's recent adoption of an increase to the license renewal, I believe it went all the way to the statutory max. We want to ask the legislature to increase that maximum authority. And then lastly, at the CPC meeting, there was discussion on collecting email addresses from licensees, so that will also now be folded into the Sunset Review report. And that concludes my presentation for this item, and if there's any additional questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any other? So what is your plans for the September meeting?
It'll be much longer.
Oh, that's lovely.
My plan for September is to have a fully completed report with the appendices, with all the attachments. We will still be working on one of the things I want to inform members, it won't look like this. I believe by November, we will have fleshed out a kind of a look and feel for the report. Probably similar to what you saw for the mobility report, because that had a nice kind of overall look to it. So we're trying to move towards that, but in September, you'll see all the attachments, all the information, all the responses, and it'll give you kind of the full picture of what our message is, what this board's message is, and you'll have an opportunity to refine it then.
And the actual hearing is in January?
It'll be
March,
next year, March,
March.
likely March.
And so when do we propose actually presenting a final product to them? Right before, or?
Well, after the November board meeting, we'll
Okay.
submit it after that.
Okay.
Make
We
any
submitted
final
right,
edits.
it's due by I think, December 1st, or
Okay.
maybe end of
Is
year,
that
so
the-
we will
okay.
turn it in shortly after the board meeting.
I thought I saw a November 1st date on there, but you're saying that's not the final report.
The November 1st relates to a specific peer review report
Okay.
that was brought up in the new issues section, or issues that the committee had. So in September, we're going to be bringing a draft of another peer review report to either include in our Sunset Review report, where we're reaching out to the legislature to see if they want it included in there, or if they really do want it November 1st, we're prepared for both.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Very comprehensive. I appreciate it. Next item is a discussion and possible action to recognize these mutual recognition agreements between the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland and CPA Australia. Ms. Sanchez.
Good morning, thank you. CBI item 1D. This agenda item provides the opportunity for the CBA to discuss the mutual recognition agreements, or MRAs, of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland, or ICAS, and CPA Australia, and to recognize their members as having satisfied the examination requirement upon successful completion of the IQEX. NASBA and AICPA have jointly established the International Qualifications Appraisal Board, or what we call IQAB, to assist in eliminating barriers between the accounting profession of the United States and accounting professions in other countries. In order for a country to begin the MRA process, they must be sponsored by a United States Board of Accountancy, who submits a formal request to IQAB to begin the evaluation process. IQAB's review determines whether the accountancy body's examination, education, and experience are substantially equivalent to the United States established CPA licensing requirements under the Uniform Accountancy Act. If so, then IQAB will negotiate an MRA and will recommend adoption of these agreements by all 55 boards of accountancy. A benefit of the MRA is for those who do want to pursue licensure in the United States may take the IQEX, which is in lieu of the CPA exam, as a way to meet the examination requirement of the licensure process. I will mention that applicants are still required to meet educational and experience requirements, along with the other licensure requirements like ethics and fingerprinting, prior to the issuance of a California license. Page 2 of the agenda item bullets out the accountancy bodies that the CBA currently recognizes. Earlier this year, IQAB entered into two new MRAs with ICAS and CPA Australia, which are your attachments 1 and 2. As the CBA does not enter into reciprocity agreements typically, IQAB's MRAs are advisory. The CBA independently determines whether a candidate has met the licensure requirements in accordance with the CBA laws. Staff recommend that CBA recognize members of ICAS and CPA Australia as having satisfied the examination requirement under Business and Professions Code Section 5082.3 upon successful completion of the IQEX. If the CBA does adopt this recommendation, staff will send the letter to the chair of IQAB, which is your attachment 4. This letter mainly states that although the CBA does not enter into reciprocity agreements, the CBA will grant recognition to members of ICAS and CPA Australia. That concludes my report. I will turn it back over to the president.
Kathleen?
Thank you. 2 questions. One, how do you respond to the obvious question that a 4.5-hour exam is the equivalent of a 2-day exam? Did somebody review the exam, the scope of the questions, the breadth of the responsive knowledge base that would be required in order to adequately respond to the question, and then compare that to the 4 parts of our CPA exam? And how then can you reach the conclusion that this very abbreviated, or certainly compared to the CPA exam, much abbreviated exam is the equivalent of what we require here?
The equivalence is not solely based on the 4.5-hour IQEX exam. It is also based on the review of the IQAB of the entire licensing body's education and experience requirements. And it's been determined by IQAB that they are substantially equivalent in their education and experience requirements and examination requirements to us. And so that IQEX gives very...
So we just take it on faith, I guess. That they know what they're doing.
Yeah, no, Patty hasn't.
So
No.
the other countries do have an examination.
Right.
What the IQEX examination does is it focuses on those areas
Oh.
of professional standards that are different in the US from the other countries. And so it's just a bridge for the
Okay,
knowledge.
thank you, that helps a lot. And then my second question is, as part of our CPA exam, there is a different, or a separate ethics exam administered separately and so forth. Do they take that?
Yes, they are still required. This only supplements the CPA exam.
Okay.
All other licensure requirements like the ethics exam, the PETH exam, fingerprinting, the 150 education requirement, all of those still must be met, and each application is reviewed on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
Katrina, and this was a hot topic in NASBR as well, wasn't it?
It has been, and Patty's explanation was excellent. So thank you for
Yes, thank you.
And my comment will be this is an area of significant time, work, and effort. So just as things come consolidated in a report to this board, and we know the level of work the staff and the committees have put into it, there is an equally rigorous and process that NASBA will go through. So
Yeah. And
that results in.
they're going through other countries and jurisdictions as we speak, having some hangups with some, but trying to move forward with others. So these are the ones that they feel most comfortable with at this point. Any other questions? Thank you so much. What? Oh, we need a motion.
Need a mo-
I'm sorry.
Would you like me to reread my recommendation?
Yes.
I move to adopt staff's recommendation.
Thank you.
Do I have s-
Second.
Any discussion? Further discussion? Public comment? Call for a vote, please.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes, we're voting on Scotland and Australia, right?
Yes.
That's, yeah,
Okay,
both
yes.
are in staff's
Yes.
Yes.
Mark Silverman, Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park. Yes. Corolla Nicholson.
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
And Alicia Burnell.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. Next item, item E.
I don't have an update.
No update. Very nice. You may now. Item F, the Department of Consumer Affairs Director's Report on the Departmental Activities. Ms. Karen Nelson.
Good morning. President Savoy, Vice President Familet, board members, Karen Nelson, Assistant Deputy Director with DCA's Board and Bureau Services. It's a pleasure to be in front of you all again. Just wanted to provide a brief update with some of the things that we've been doing at the department. On June 25th, the director had his first board member and advisory committee leadership teleconference. We had over 30 participants in the call, which included presidents, vice presidents, chairs, vice chairs, and representatives of our advisory committee. I do believe President Savoy did participate, and I do hope that you found the information valuable. In that call, the director provided updates on pro rata Assembly Bill 2138, the executive officer's salary study, and some regulatory process improvements. And with the initial success of this teleconference, we do plan to host another one in the near future, so stay tuned for that date, and we'll be sure to send that over to you all. The next director's quarterly meeting is scheduled for Monday, August 6th. This is a new date from a previously reported date of July, so please do mark your calendars. We'll make sure to send that over to the board to ensure that we have the correct date on your calendars. Specific to licensing and enforcement work groups, first of all, I'd like to thank the Accountancy Board for participating and being a very active member in those work groups. We've had a very fun and exciting dialogue with regard to business processes and looking at ways to really collaborate and pinpoint best practices in each of our programs. So I very much appreciate your participation and hope you do continue to attend those meetings. We do continue to hold those meetings monthly, and in June, the licensing work group heard from Dr. Joseph Morris, the Executive Officer of Board of Registered Nursing, and learned about BRN's Cloud Drive. It is their cloud drive that does help streamline their licensing processing applications. And the enforcement work group had discussed process improvements for performance measure 2, and most recently heard a presentation from the Department of Justice specific to the Attorney General's annual report containing baseline information on accusation referrals received and adjudicated accusations from our DCA's board and bureaus. Lastly, I'd like to just touch on our future leadership development program, which the recruitment is underway for its second cohort. We did receive 48 applications in this second cycle, and we do hope that we have someone from your board, from your staff, that will be participating in that program. And as always, if the department can be of service to you, let us know. We are here to serve. That concludes my remarks.
Go ahead, Patty.
How many individuals of the 48 typically are selected for that group? Do you have an idea?
So there's not a set number. The last cohort was 12. 12.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your attendance.
Oh, thank you. We'll
Thank
see you next time.
All right. That concludes my report. We now turn it over to the Vice President, George Familet.
Thank you, President Savoy. We have a few items for the report of the Vice President. First item is to recommend the appointment of Kathy Johnson, CPA, and Marhatz Nasi Basan, CPA, to the Enforcement Advisory Committee. The Enforcement Advisory Committee assists with the CBA in an advisory capacity with enforcement activities. This includes reviewing closed investigation files, providing technical guidance on open investigations, and participating in investigative hearings. I have conferred with the CBA executive officer to verify that both individuals have met the appropriate requirements for license renewal and have demonstrated the skills and knowledge to serve as a member on the Enforcement Advisory Committee. I recommend Kathy Johnson, CPA, be appointed to the Enforcement Advisory Committee effective July 26, 2018 through July 31st, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Public comments? Call for a vote.
Alicia Verhow.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
George Family.
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson.
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
And Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay.
I recommend Marhatz Nasi Rasan, CPA, be appointed to the Enforcement Advisory Committee effective July 26, 2018 through July 31st, 2020.
Second.
Any further comments, discussions, public comments? Call for a vote, please.
Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park.
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson.
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Yes.
George Family.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
And Alicia Verhow.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. That concludes my report.
Thank you so much. Next item is a report of the,
We lost him.
I don't know if he specifically has it, or we can skip to the next item, which is an update on the costs associated with accepting credit cards from Deanna.
And I can provide a summary of Mr. Silverman's.
There you go.
It was just very brief, just to let members know that the Department of Consumer Affairs is still wrapping up last fiscal year's budget numbers. So we anticipate bringing the end-of-year fiscal report to the September board meeting. And as we're hoping that the first quarter financial statement will be presented at the November board meeting. DCA is still working through the different kinks with the new fiscal accounting system that the state is now using. So it's contingent upon that, but everything is looking good for getting the end of fiscal year report for September.
Okay. Thank you on that. Next, your report.
So the purpose of this agenda item is to discuss the costs associated with accepting credit card payment for license renewal. As discussed at the May board meeting, the CBA is in the process of implementing the ability for individuals to use a credit card to pay for their license renewal fee. And it's anticipated that this will be in place in late 2018, November 2018. As part of the process, there is a transaction fee that is charged by the credit card processor. So today's discussion is just to determine whether the CBA should absorb the fee or whether the transaction fee should be paid by the individual user. And for either of those options, there's no legal constraints in place. So under the model where the board absorbs the fee, a contract would be established with the vendor, and it would be, the amount of the contract would be based on a 2% transaction fee on the total amount that's going to be charged. And if you look at your agenda item on page 2, you'll see that for fiscal year 18-19, that the total estimated renewal revenue is about $5.8 million. So the cost would be approximately $94,000 that the board would be absorbing. It's based on an 80% participation rate, which is what the DCA, other DCA boards have experienced as they've implemented the credit card acceptance. This $94,000 estimate would obviously increase if the CVA's renewal fee change is approved in future year, and you can get a sense of what that would be at the $250 renewal fee cost. The board would potentially be absorbing up to about $198,000, but that's down the road a couple of years, but I just wanted to provide that information. For the current fiscal year, because we're not anticipating starting until November, the cost for the current fiscal year would probably be around $63,000 because it would be prorated based on when the program went into place. So the other option, if the board did not want to absorb the fee, would be to have the transaction fee paid by the individual user. Under this model, the card holder would get 2 transactions on their credit card statement. One would be for the renewal fee, and the other one would be for the transaction fee. And then just based on information provided during the board's prior discussion, DCA's experience is that agencies who require the user to pay typically have less participation. And so with that, staff are recommending that the CBA absorb the transaction fees associated with using a credit card for license renewal. And at this time, I'll turn it back to the president, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. So discussion regarding whether CBA should absorb the fees or pass them along to the consumer. Katrina?
One of my questions is, does the board expect to save on staff time with credit card processing? Because there's no envelope to open, no check to will you remind me how this is happening? So we're talking about an increased cost, but at some point, is there a benefit to freeing up staff time? Or will it actually increase because of the way this program is being set up?
I don't think it will increase. I think the board will probably see some savings, if you will. Right now, the majority of renewals that are received are processed at what we call Department of Consumer Affairs, their central cashiering office, where they kind of basically process the bulk of renewals for a lot of the different boards. So the information would be transmitted to them, and then they would be giving us information kind of like they do now. It would just be maybe a little bit different report. So I do see some savings with regards to our cashiering staff time. Because this isn't 100% automated with regards to the renewal form, there's still going to be a renewal form to review and process and, you know, evaluate and work with the licensee if there's any deficiencies. So that side won't change too much. So I wouldn't say it would increase it. I'd probably say that it would, if there is an impact, it would decrease the workload.
Question?
Yes.
Currently, the form of payment that's acceptable is just checks?
Check, cashier's check, money order, and then we have very limited instances where we can do wire transfers. Typically, if they're outside the country, that tends to work better in terms of transmitting the money. Cash occasionally. Ironically, we actually do get cash sent through the mail at times, so that occurs as well.
Eureka!
Yeah.
The underground accounting business.
I know.
Kathleen?
I think we talked about this, so forgive my lapse in memory, but this is just credit card, acceptance of credit cards. This is not acceptance of any automated debit to your checking account or use of technology like Zelle or any of those alternatives.
It's just credit card.
Have we thought about the others or no?
Right now, the way the vendor is set up, it's mainly through the credit card. All the other infrastructure that's been set up for the boards to accept credit card payments, it hasn't been branched out. So that's something that could possibly be added in the future. But I would say to try to get this launched as quickly as possible, it would be focused on the credit card first. And then down the road, we would look at if there's a direct debit from an account based on a checking account number, that kind of thing.
Do you know by chance if there's a fee on the latter? I don't think there is. I'm not absolutely sure though. I know I'm not charged it.
To
Direct debit to the account. Or Zelle. Zelle is another one.
ACH?
Yeah, I'm not positive. I think it all depends on I would imagine that the vendor who's facilitating that transfer has to make money somehow. So I would imagine there could potentially be a fee, but we haven't actually explored that too much, because right now the current vendor that DCA is using, it's credit card based. So.
Can I add something very quickly? Well, I think you make a great suggestion. I just wanted to point out that state agencies are required to accept credit card payments. So this is just a process of trying to facilitate that. So whether the board ends up accepting payment through Zelle or another direct transmill or whatever, they do need to do by credit card. So we're just working to implement that.
Yeah, I mean, typically ACH, and just paying my son's college at the State of California Institute, ACH is not a charge, but credit card is. So probably not, because it's just getting money directly out of your account. So
So that'd be a good alternative to pursue, because it would.
it would not cost, but that's phase,
No, I get it.
phase 7.
Next
whatever.
phase, yeah,
Yeah.
down the road.
Yes.
I was just gonna mention that, I agree, I think that that's something we could explore potentially as maybe a phase 2. And I think when we eventually get to our whole business modernization project, that will likely be included in what we explore. Right now, the contract that is established, they already have a set infrastructure for those payments being processed and uploaded in our antiquated database system as it is. And so I think that would be kind of the first step, and then we could explore kind of after we got that up and running, if there were additional payment methods, if that would be acceptable to the board.
So throw something out there.
I mean, I typically am, this is a convenience and people should just pay for their own darn fee. What's not clear to me is, and I think what's important is there a desire by DCA and by us to really maximize participation here, because there's a cost benefit that will come through on pro rata or other allocations that occur? And if so, how do we consider that in this part? Because I think what I'm hearing here is if we implement a fee for doing this, we're not going to get much participation. We'll get a convenience out there and a path to being able to accept the credit card. But if there's some pressure here from DCA and it's going to result in something down the road, then that could be compelling here in terms of which path we head down.
Okay.
So I don't have any direct pressure that I'm receiving from DCA, whether we absorb or whether we pass that along. But the benefit of having individuals participate, I think, is significant, because part of this process will probably give us access to their information electronically. That would be of great benefit. And I will tell you, on our customer satisfaction survey, one of the significant areas of negative feedback is the lack of ability to pay online. And so I think having that will be very beneficial. As far as absorbing it or passing that along, it really is based on maximizing the number of people who will utilize this. And we do know that if we absorb it, we'll have a higher turnout.
You're looking at a renewal fee of $200 at 2%? Yes, I mean, is that significant?
And apologies for
That's
having been out during the beginning of this discussion. Patty, what's your sense from DCA in terms of other boards and what they do?
At this time, there's only one other bureau that is using the user pay model. So, and that would be the Bureau of Cannabis, and their licensing fees are much higher than ours. So that may have played into it a little bit. The other boards that are utilizing the credit card option at present are absorbing the fee.
Okay.
Thank you.
And there, just if I could add
Sure.
on something that Patty was going to say, I think that accepting the credit card right now, I think at first glance, it's probably, there is going to be a little bit of savings on staff side. As we automate that process more, with regards to what our systems administrator, Dave Hansen, when he was here at our May board meeting, and he was talking about adding, enabling licensees to be able to provide more information when they are logging in. I think that will eventually start saving time and staff time processing and all that. I think at the onset, it will probably be a wash, but then steps after that, there will be time savings for staff.
Kathleen first and then Carol.
FTB does accept credit card, and to the best of my knowledge, they make you pay. If you tend to, you pay that taxes that way. They do.
FTB, IRS, property taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
all
most
that.
people, but these are bigger amounts of money as well, so,
Sure.
Carol.
Actually, I agree with us paying it, one, out of convenience, and then if there's no rule, it's not that it's set in stone, and we can change it later. And also, out of a compliance, and also to be able to, for us to keep a lookout and of charges versus the company going, well, if somebody else is paying it, then our fees can probably increase. That's kind of a self-auditing or control.
Do I have a motion? Or
I'll move
further-
it.
Let's
So-
have a motion, then we can have further discussion.
Yeah,
or
no,
just-
I'll move it. So I recommend that CBA absorb the transaction fees associated with using a credit card for license renewal payments. So to ensure that higher volume of use and provide an alternative payment method to the licensees.
Second.
Any further discussion? Any public comment? Call for a vote?
Kathleen Wright,
No.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park,
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and Alicia Burhouse.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you for that. Next item will be the report of the executive officer.
And at this point, I do not have an update on staffing, and so with the president's permission, I would invite Mr. Bone to come forward.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. On item 4B, relating to the update publication.
4B, 4C, and 4D. It's all yours.
Busy.
I'm ready. Buckled up. The purpose of this item, Mr. President, is to consider whether to transition to a primarily electronic-based distribution of the CBA's update newsletter. The CBA is required by law to distribute to its licensees a report of its activities. The CBA meets this requirement through the publishing and mailing of the update. Over the years, the size of the CBA's licensee population has grown, and the costs to source paper and purchase postage have steadily increased. This has led to a nearly $300,000 annual cost to produce and mail the update. In addition, printing and mailing can add several weeks to our production timeframes. To address these costs and speed up production, staff proposed transitioning to a primarily electronic-based distribution of the update, but still allow readers, by request, to continue to receive a paper copy through the mail. If the CBA approves this recommendation, staff propose the following next steps. First, consult with counsel on the appropriate amendments necessary to Business and Professions Code Section 5008. This section, as noted in your analysis, states that the CBA must distribute the report of its activities to all licensees, and therefore our current practice is to mail it out in a hard copy form. If we mainly send the notification via email to those for whom we have an email address, and send a hard copy only to those who request it, an amendment would be necessary to that code section. Such a statutory change would likely not take effect until January 1, 2020, giving the CBA sufficient time to carry out its next step, which would be to develop a communication and outreach plan to make update readers aware of this change, including their options to receive the update, and encourage them to provide their email address. Currently, as we've discussed, the CBA lacks email addresses for many of its licensees, underscoring the importance of a communication effort to inform them of this change. That concludes my remarks, Mr. President. Happy to answer
I
questions.
mean, thank you. My recollection is we attempted this a number of years ago, and the overwhelming population said they still wanted it, hard. I mean, we're now in the next century,
Yeah.
and it makes more
Yes, we are.
reasonable to absorb the cost of the credit cards by eliminating the cost of printing and mailing this out. I mean,
Well,
yes, Kathy.
along that same line, why don't we charge the ones who want it in paper?
I don't know if we're allowed
I don't think
to,
it's
but,
a,
Well, I mean, if we're gonna rewrite the statute anyway, I mean, yeah, if we
Well,
have to do a rewrite of the reg or whatever, then why not just, I mean, that's typically the way they do it, isn't it? I mean, when I opt for paper, they charge me.
I don't know.
well, I mean, eventually, it's all gonna go away. The paper's all gonna go away. Eventually, people are not gonna want a paper newsletter. I get mine, and I have it framed, but nevertheless, I'd rather have an electronic newsletter. It's just,
I mean, but the ones that receive it
yeah.
can print it and
They
do
can
what they
print
want
it,
with
and-
it.
and then
You
there's
know,
an
they put it on their
option.
walls, but it's
Right.
the way we present it, it's the
Right.
way we send it out. $300,000 a year
Yeah, yeah.
to satisfy, what, 21% wanted it still? Or
And I think-
that
and I
last
think there's an
survey
op-
we did?
Right, and I think there's an opportunity that more people will, especially with our younger generation. I consider myself young, but with our younger folks, I think they're going to be wanting that electronic newsletter. They don't want a paper newsletter.
I think my thing is, if you don't have an email, I mean, what is the proposed method by sending everybody an email which has an attachment or a notification, go on the website and download it? What's the prescribed way of delivering?
So presently, what we do is, as I said, everyone gets gets a hard copy in the mail. We also, for those who have signed up to receive notification via email, we send an email out to those. I think it's 7,000 or 8,000 folks have subscribed to that. And then they are directed to the website. They're provided a link to where
Right.
the update is posted on the website. But as a part of our communication plan, Mr. President, if we have other suggestions on how we could modify the way we leverage email addresses or other technology, we could bring that forth at a later time.
Yeah, well, technology, at least at this board level, has always been a challenge. So I wouldn't want anything to slip in terms of people not being able to get it because we're just promulgating no more paper.
Well, and as I stated, with the statutory change that appears to be necessary, that provides us a nice long runway to do communication and outreach, so that way nobody is caught off guard.
And we're looking for January of 2020. So we need to start now
Yes.
to get Jose first and then.
The opt-in for a print thing, is that being viewed as a one-time opt-in or maybe an annual opt-in? But, so maybe what I would do is move staff's recommendation with probably the minor modification that the opt-in for the print not just be a one-time thing, but rather some regular interval, whether it's annual or some biannual, whatever you want to do, just to allow for the ability to, further reduce those print rolls, if you will.
I like the biannual option. It's actually cool.
I like the annual better, but
Well, fine.
Kathleen, so is that a
Yes.
motion? That's a motion.
that was a motion.
That's a good motion. Any second on that motion before we have further discussion? Nobody?
Apparently, there's no second on the motion.
Oh, I'll second it.
Oh, I saw the enthusiasm and I didn't see the
I will
second. was-
enthusiastically
Okay.
second the motion.
Any further discussion on this item? Kathleen? Yes.
Very quickly, just to point out that, as you know, the board is required to distribute this, so I think I'm a little nervous about the opt-in feature of we want print, because you can't require an email address, and that's really the only way to distribute it, is via regular mail. So in my mind, it would be, you're gonna keep getting a paper one unless you tell us not to.
Well, I think what can be done, I don't see that
But
as
at
an
this
issue
point, before
at
we
all.
have
I mean,
statutory
I don't think it has to be an email communication to opt in.
Thank you.
It could be a postcard that says, hey, you're currently enrolled in the print option. If you wish to continue to do this, you gotta go to this website and do this to continue to opt in, or send this postcard back, to this address, or whatever you wanna do. But there's gotta be a mechanism to
Yeah.
start Just-
Right.
Oh, and I
Or-
agree with you. I think it's
Shouldn't be this
great
hard.
to have it sent via email. I'm just trying to make sure that the board is aware of what the legal obligations are, and that's all.
So, but with that being said, if they do not have an email address on file,
Right.
then send out a postcard that the update is available for you to look at on our website. And I think the cost of mailing out a
Agreed.
post, right?
Agreed, but the statute says the CBA is required to distribute it. It actually uses that word, distribute, so.
So in our,
it's considered
in our whole
distribute.
process, can we change the language in what we're doing
Oh,
anyway?
yeah, and I think that's what
to
Erin is
take
bringing
care
up
of
right
that?
now.
Great.
That
And I fully support that.
We're not gonna do this actually until that statutory change is made. So we won't fully implement that so that we are in compliance. with
This is
the
just to
statute.
get the ball rolling.
Kathleen?
Would the website then include a searchable database for the update publications? That would be question one. And question two, would it give the flexibility to be able to print by article rather than the entire newsletter? Or just those be suggestions to think about?
I think those are great suggestions to consider, Ms. Wright. To answer your prior question, currently anybody can search by keyword, and I believe update publications will come up. So if you're searching for some topic, and that search engine on the website will find the relevant documents, including the update publications that would meet their criteria. And we do group them all in one spot on the website, so it makes it very convenient for visitors to find every issue online.
As far as article, I mean, I guess when you see it, you can print out a page number, when you go to print.
Okay.
Presently, it is one single PDF, and so we would have to make some other changes, Mr. President, if we wish to allow people to find one article at a
Right.
time. That would require some additional modifications to the way we
All right.
publish.
So we have, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with our newsletters that we have through our company. It's, it's one big newsletter and then there's a link and you can just print out that one article.
Okay. All right, so we have a first, we have a second. Any more discussion? Any public comment? Call for a vote, please.
Alicia Verhow?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
George Familet?
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez?
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson?
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park?
Yes.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Mark Silverman?
Yes.
And Kathleen Wright?
Yes.
All right, motion passes unanimously. Next item, letter C.
Mr. President, this item is intended to provide the members an overview of the CBA's upcoming activities to develop its 2019 to 2021 strategic plan. The CBA strategic plan guides its actions and projects to help ensure that it continues to meet its consumer protection mission and other performance objectives. The current plan, which runs through the end of 2018, is organized around 7 goals: enforcement, licensing, customer service, outreach, laws and regulations, emerging technologies, and organizational effectiveness. As we approach the end of the current year, your staff have already began collaborating with the Department of Consumer Affairs on the development of the next plan. As indicated in the write-up for this item, DCA has conducted interviews with CBA members, the executive and assistant executive officers, along with committee member and stakeholder surveys, and a focus group with CBA managers. All that data will be leveraged at a strategic planning workshop to be held during the September 2018 CBA meeting. After that workshop, the draft 2019 to 2021 strategic plan will be presented for review and possible approval at the November 2018 CBA meeting. Lastly, Mr. President, I'd like to note that an update on the status of our current objectives under the 2016 to 2018 strategic plan will be presented at the next meeting. That concludes my remarks, sir.
Any questions on this item? Thank you very much. Next item.
Mr. President, this is my update on our communication and outreach efforts. On May 31st, CBA member Molina Lopez and CBA licensing manager Suzanne Gracia attended an outreach event held on the campus of the UC San Diego Extension Campus. Ms. Gracia educated about 30 students regarding the requirements for licensure. Looking towards the fall, the CBA has been invited to join Cal CPA for at least 2 upcoming events. The first is a live webinar entitled "So You Want to Be a CPA," and is tentatively scheduled for late September. This event is aimed at those late in their education or early in their career and considering heavily licensure. The second will be held at Delta Community College, located in Stockton, likely late in the month of October. This event is targeted at those who are very early in their education. At both events, the CBA would provide an overview of the licensure requirements, but with a focus on the aspect most relevant to those audiences. In late November, Mr. President, as you know, you've been invited to speak at San Francisco at Golden Gate University as a part of their Braden Leadership Speaker Series. The topic of President Savoy's talk is Leaders, Born or Made?
Intriguing.
Yes. In fact, I got a very favorable response from
did
the
you?
administration. They said, "What a fantastic topic!" So they're eager. They're on pins and needles waiting for you, sir.
And I also had told them I wasn't going to be president anymore, and they said, no, we still want you.
They said that to me
Because
last
the
year.
date, it's post, yeah, it's right after.
Mr. President, that concludes my remarks.
Excellent. Any discussions, any comments? Thank you so much. Let's move right into the reports of Advisory Committee, Enforcement Advisory Committee. Mr. Francella?
Thank you. I'm here on behalf of Joe Rosenbaum, EAC Chair. The Enforcement Advisory Committee held its meeting on July 12th in the Sacramento office. At the meeting, members reviewed 2 closed cases and held 5 investigative hearings. The next meeting of the EAC will be on October 18th down in San Diego. If members have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
All right, good
All
job.
right.
Yes, Mr. Evans.
All right. See how fast this can go.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, board members. I'm David Evans, Chair of the Qualifications Committee. There were 2 subcommittee meetings held in April, one on April 18th in North Hollywood and one on April 25th at the CBA office in Sacramento. At these April meetings, there were a total number of 7 Section 69 reviews and 1 personal appearance. 6 were recommended for licensure and 2 were deferred. The Qualifications Committee met yesterday here in Los Angeles, and there was also a subcommittee meeting held on July 18th at the CBA office in Sacramento. At these meetings, there were a total of 10 Section 69 reviews and 3 personal appearances, of which 8 were recommended for licensure and 5 were deferred. Our next meeting will be October 25th, 2018 at the CBA office in Sacramento, and that concludes my report.
Thank you. Any questions? Wow, beautiful. Thank you. Peer Review Oversight Committee, Mr. DeLizer? No report?
No report.
Beautiful, even better.
Well done.
Thank you. I'd like to move forward the report of the Enforcement Chief, Mr. Francella.
All right, thank you. This is item 8A, the Enforcement Activity Report. This covers 11 months of data ending on May 31st, 2018. So pages 1 and 2 deal with complaints received. For fiscal year to date, the CBA had received 2,100, just over 2,100 complaints, with just about 2/3 of the complaints being internally generated. Moving on to page 3 and investigations. Of the total 2,078 investigations closed in fiscal year 17-18, just over 1,300 investigations were closed within the first 6 months, accounting for 66% of the total number of investigations closed, and an additional, and then 1,600, just over 1,600 cases were closed within a year. So within a year of the investigation, 80% of our investigations are closed within a year. Also, the CBA has seen a decrease from the last report for average days to close from 224 to 204 for this report. Page 4 provides an inventory of the investigations pending based on the age of cases. Nearly 65% of the division's cases are less than 6 months old, and 86% are less than a year. Staff have made significant efforts to close older and aged cases. We did see a slight uptick from I think it was 49 last time to 53. But at this point, last year, it was 133, so we have seen a significant reduction in that inventory. And staff expect this number of age cases to trend down similarly in future reports. Lastly, the average age of our cases decreased slightly from 205 days of the last report to 191 for this report. As for discipline, these are pages 6 through 9. The CBA has referred 73 matters to the AG's office, which is similar to last year's pace. Page 7 highlights the cases pending at the AG's office. This inventory continues to decrease. At this point last year, we had 125 matters pending at the AG's office. This year, we only have 76. Of the 76 cases, 40% are less than 6 months old. There are only 2 cases pending over 24 months. One is the same case that's stuck in the court systems, and another is one staff are working to either obtain settlement or set for hearing.
Excellent.
Page 8 provides information on the final orders adopted by the CBA. Through May 2018, the CBA had taken disciplinary action on 78 matters. This number will go up as a number of them took effect on, I believe, June 25th. So when we close out next year's report, you'll have a higher number. Lastly, on page 9 regarding cost, as of May 31st, the CBA had ordered cost recovery in 49 cases in the amount of just over $341,000. Moving on to citation and fines, this is on page 10. Over the course of 11 months, the CBA has issued 106 citations. 31 of those were recently concluded cases were aged related to peer review and license renewal deficiencies, contributing to an overall increase in the average days to issue citations. However, the average days to issue citations did decrease from 235 at the last report to 229 for this report. And if we take out the 31 aged cases, it would be about 115 days for the citations we're issuing. As for FTB and probation monitoring, at the top of page 11 are the collected monies associated with the FTB Intercept program. Through the first 11 months, we'd referred just over $14,000 and collected just short of $9,900. Also on page 11 is information on the probation monitoring. The total number of probationers is 159, and let's see, on the next page, on page 12, we've been trying to increase the transparency related to our probation monitoring activities. So staff have included some new statistics highlighting the types of probation terms being monitored and the types of violations that were detected. I would just like to note that for many of these, the same person is violated in multiple areas. So each one's not an individual person. It could be the same person or persons violating various areas. So with that, I'm happy to turn discussions over to members and answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Franco. Excellent. We'll move forth also with the report of the licensing chief, Gina Sanchez.
Okay, so this licensing activity report reflects statistics through May 2018. At the September CBA meeting this year, it will reflect 3 full fiscal years. Beginning on page 1, this reflects the total CBA population of 105,146 licensees and registrants. Moving on to page 2, reflects the amount of contact staff have with our stakeholders, beginning with the telephone calls, emails received, and the bottom chart is our certification requests from stakeholders. These requests are for CBA records relating to exam scores. The unit is currently processing these within 24 days of receipt. On page 3 begins the statistics relating to the CPA exam. As of May 31st, the examination unit had received and approved about 5,200 first-time sitter applications and over 13,000 repeat applications. Currently, there are 422 applicants that the CBA is waiting additional information in order to complete their file. The top of page 4 identifies statistics for requests to extend a notice to schedule to take the exam or to extend a score that's about to expire. Additionally, statistics are captured for the number of individuals requested and were approved for accommodations to take the exam, which are being processed in about 20 days. Page 5 begins the statistics for initial licensure. So far this fiscal year, we have approved almost 2,000 applicants for licensure, of which 530 were given the authority to assign attest engagements. Currently, there are about 865 applications that the CBA is still awaiting additional information, which is down from the previous report by over 200. Page 6 of the agenda item continues with initial licensing statistics. So far this fiscal year, 184 California accountancy firms have been approved for licensure with an average processing time of under the 30 days, and 47 out-of-state firms have been approved for registration. Okay, beginning on page 7? Yes, page 7 is the renewal-related statistics. The top of this page reflects the total number of licensees that have renewed so far this fiscal year. The second chart identifies, out of those who have renewed, how many of those renewals have been reviewed by renewal staff. Out of over the 33,000 renewal applications that have been reviewed by staff this fiscal year, as of May 31st, only 740 are awaiting information from the licensee in order to obtain compliance. As noted below the chart, the most common deficiencies identified in a worksheet review are not submitting the peer review reporting form, an incomplete application, meaning maybe not signed, or not satisfying the ethics requirement. Those are the top 3. Okay, page 8 highlights our retired applicants and our division highlights. First, I'd like to comment on the first bullet. As you are aware, examination and initial licensing units have been experiencing consistent increase in the time frame to process applications. To address this issue, the CBA senior management and staff have begun conducting work groups within the division, and we are doing an extensive review of processes, procedures, and staffing resources within the licensing division. The primary goal is to develop a course of action to implement program efficiencies that will enable the licensing division to return to our normal 30-day processing timeframe. I will keep the CBA informed as I move through this project with Patty and Deanne. And this concludes my report. I will turn it back over to the president.
I see some questions. Kathleen?
Thank you, Gina. Last meeting, we had a question that focused on the decline in the number of, I think it was CPA individual license applications from the prior period to the current period. And we sort of agreed that we were going to follow that as an issue to see if a decline in people who are interested in becoming CPAs was in fact not just a blip, but a realistic trend, so to speak. Am I looking at the right chart to make that a determination on page 5?
On page 5. I believe my last report specifically went into the decline in exam candidates, and I had reached out to NASBA and Cal CPA, who their committee had just met just that one time so far, to begin to address and explore the issues from examination even to initial licensure in regards to the decline. We're keeping our ear to the ground and being in contact with our societies to get any new information on this topic so that I can bring it to the attention of the board.
So that would be which of these charts?
The first time exam applications are on page 3.
Okay.
So there's that decline there. The licensure is on page 5. So 3 and 5.
Page 5 looks okay because the number for 17-18 is 11 months. The our application is going down though, I guess.
On
It's
page
also
5?
11 months.
Page 3.
Oh, page 3. Yes, those are the examination first-time test takers.
Also
We are definitely aware of that decrease, and we are keeping in contact with our associations to find out any new information or if any studies or if we can be a part of anything to assist in figuring this out.
Okay, and then my second question is, you were for a period of time reporting the results for the CPA exam for California and then nationwide. did we not have, and I believe it's periodic, and there's a cycle where it doesn't fit in our cycle. Is that what's going on here?
Yes, those are released after each quarter, after each closed window. Each quarter, we get a report from NASBA.
Okay.
Once we get it, we attach that to the very next board meeting agenda item.
Okay,
So once we receive it, we will be bringing it.
okay.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry, Jose.
Question, Mr. President.
Speak on up.
On both the new licensure applications that are deficient or sitting in a deficient pile and the renewals, tell me a little bit about process. So you send a notice out to these folks, and it's up to them, obviously, to cure the deficiency. So if I'm one of those and I respond, what does the timetable look like? I mean, and what are we hearing from our folks? I assume they're following up because they're motivated to get this thing done, but how much of a priority does that get in terms of getting them out of the deficient pile? And I'm trying to, we didn't get to see too much of the sunset review discussion on the licensing side, and so I'm trying to get a sense of, do we have any issues that sort of might surface out of that we need to start preparing for in that context? So that's the nature of the question.
Okay, well, in the division, we kind of classify it as two things. We have either new apps, new applications that have not been looked at, or new mail, which means new documents have come in. Those get split evenly. The lead coordinator really manages the workflow on those using dates, oldest date out there and the amount of workload with the staff available to process it. So we keep those at, we're very conscientious of those levels and those timeframes. But I do want to mention, in addition to just sending you a letter and then just waiting for you, we do make an extra effort in all three of the units to follow up with that phone call. If it's just a quick little, hey, you didn't mark this, let me give you a phone call, let me shoot you an email, and try and clear it up right then versus the hard copy letter and then the waiting. There's also via email, we can accept certain things via email from the applicant to try and speed up that process if they do follow up with a phone call or an email to us to one of our main inboxes.
Okay.
So the timeframe, our goal is to process not only new applications within 30 days, but also new mail. Any new mail received, our goal is to process that also within 30 days, if not sooner.
Okay, thank you so much for your report. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's go to item number 11. Minutes. Can I get approval of the minutes of our May 17th board meeting?
Can I just move approval of all the items in items 11A, B, C, and D?
We have to adopt A, and we can lump B, C, and D together.
Great.
So
I'll
you're,
adopt item 11A.
do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Yes?
Can I ask for a friendly amendment to the motion on the table, just on page 20067? Can we replace the words "will be" to the phrase "include the use of"? It may actually have been the words I said, but in print, it's a very confusing sentence.
Wow, you remember what you said? Wow, that's great. Specifically.
I actually don't remember exactly saying that, but I can imagine that. But yeah.
Could you repeat that change?
Strike "will be" and replace the words "include use of," because it's talking about the regional conference. Will be confusing titles. There's like a word missing.
Got it?
Thanks.
All right, with that, we got a first, second with some adjustments. Any discussion? Call for a vote, please.
Alicia Burhow,
Abstain.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
George Fowler,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson,
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
and Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
Motion passes. Now can I get a motion to accept B, C, and D bundled?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Public comment? Call for a vote?
Kathleen Wright,
I'm sorry, I just want to look at D, B, C, and D. Okay, yes, yes. Sorry.
Art Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar. Sunny Youngsun Park.
Yes.
Carola Nicholson.
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Yes.
George Family.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
And Alicia Verhow.
Abstain.
Okay, motion passes. Let's attempt to start item 12. The American Institute of CPAs report on meetings of that State Board Committee by Ms. Salazar.
Okay, thank you. On May 30th, 31st, I attended a joint state board committee that was held in conjunction with the Board of Examiners or Board of Examinations Committee at the ASCP offices in New York. So I was able to go through an orientation, learn more about the examinations team. There was a lot of discussion about this entire psychometric process that happens in the development and preparation of the exam, so the validity, reliability, and fairness of the exam. There was discussion about the windows, and there is an interest in moving towards continuous testing, because as you may remember, or you may be aware if you're not a CPA, you cannot test on any, there are some windows where you are unable to test in the current system. So the goal would be to move towards making that a possibility, and within the 18-month, that would facilitate candidates being able to have more flexibility and potentially help folks where the 18 months has been a bit of a barrier to passing the exam. There was discussion about candidate passage rates and the pipeline, although that was done on a national level, and I will comment, it correlated exam changes with applications over a much lengthier period of time than we see in our reports. So that was helpful in seeing correlations between when there are exam changes or rules changes. There would tend to be an increase in interest prior to a new exam change being rolled out. There was also talk about globalization with movement with examination locations in Scotland, England, Germany, and Ireland. So they're projecting third quarter of 2018. And they also indicated that AICPA is working with the SEMA staff to assist in validation prior to doing an exam launch in India. So that was part of the conversation, that there is a process in place to explore examinations being given in that country. So with that, I would say it was a very helpful use of my time and has helped me understand more, and I'd be happy to work with staff and answer questions on behalf of the board in my role on that committee.
Thank you. You can continue if you'd like with, as the Pacific Regional Director of NASBA.
I'd be happy to. I will say I attended the Pacific Regional meeting as a director, but I'd be happy to turn that presentation over to someone else.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think we should split it a little bit. I'll speak a little bit, and the other attendees at the meeting. I thought it was an incredibly informative meeting. Certainly allowed me to rekindle friendships that I had made a few years back when I first attended the NASBA meetings and hadn't been there for a while. Talked about a whole bunch of things, as you see the agendas in here, particularly about the deals with other countries and accepting their accountants as CPAs. But I'd also first want to turn it to Jose regarding something specific he was dealing with, and then the new members that, you remember?
Which agenda topic?
Whatever.
I know you are
Pick
B1
one.
report of the Pacific Region Director, but.
Just pick one. I mean, just your experiences of being there and what the observations and.
It was productive. It's always helpful to just understand, you know, process issues that other boards are facing. I mean, cannabis and kind of how everyone is dealing with those issues. I don't know what issue you had in mind that you know, because there was a lot of energized discussion many different topics. I mean, mobility certainly continues to be, updating everyone on where is California in the journey of mobility, and making sure people understand the ongoing monitoring aspect of what we've got to do. And so that was part of the discussion. I think it catches some boards by surprise because they thought, okay, we had a lift in round one to get to implementation, and then just to realize that there is a sunset date to our regulations, and that there is an expectation that'll be monitored through really now through a sunset review process to keep us on task.
Thank you. The two new members that attended for the first time, Carol?
I found it extremely helpful and useful, and not only to think, now we think of the consumers, but also think of the exam itself and the parts that it covers, and specifically with technology changing so rapidly, the rest of the world, but here, and how is that going to be, how can we focus on that type of education and the testing, and how the exam needs to change in order to keep up with the times, so the profession doesn't become irrelevant. I thought that was very interesting.
Thank you. Liz?
Thank you. Yes, I definitely learned a lot about NASBA and how the state of California is interconnected with all of the other boards across the nation, as well as internationally. That was very useful for me to understand. Also, a lot of the feedback I got from a lot of the networking I was doing is, the California board, it seemed like there was there is a good presence that the California board brings to the table, and I think it's recognized easily. And then two other points. It was very exciting to see some of my fellow board members on some of the panels. They were discussing very interesting topics, and I thought that also was a good presence for the leadership that California brings. And then just lastly, my favorite discussion, and I thought this is not a topic I would ever be interested in, but we had a very, very fruitful discussion on cryptocurrency by Carol Van Cleef. She brought a lot of excitement to this topic. It certainly opened my eyes to this, and so, stuff I never thought I'd be interested in, I ended up being, okay, cryptocurrency, that's cool. So thank you, it was a very
Thank you.
fruitful experience.
I mean, certainly one of the big topics that they brought and spent an awful lot of time there was another pathway to becoming a CPA through technology, the IT person. And, it was eye-opening, but there was an awful lot of good, constructive comments and criticisms about how to go about doing it, because the way they kind of put it towards us, most of us from California said, no, this is never going to happen. But there was suggestions in other ways of going about it, maybe adding another part of the exam, take 3 out of 5 or 4, to capture the same information. But we also pointed out to them is that you did not have to be a CPA to be a partner in a CPA firm.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if, how they looked at that, but certainly an IT person could be a CPA in a CPA firm. So it doesn't require the licensure. And we weren't sure how many young people coming out of school, those letters or the CPA meant that much to them. So it's an ongoing discussion. They brought it forth as talking points. I don't think it was a recommendation, but between AICPA and NASBA, they were rolling it out of something that we had to look at in the very near future. So I found that to be most enlightening of most of the things that went on there. I'd like to wrap. Do you have more comments about the other?
I do
Yeah,
have
so I'd like to hear the rest of the committee reports that you're on, and then we'll wrap it up. We have a time certain at 1:30. Just so you know, it is my intentions, depending on how long the petition takes, to wrap up everything today. But we shall see. So
Okay,
continue, finish your
wonderful.
reports, and
Thank
then
you.
we'll break.
So be brief.
That explains a
Yeah.
lot. Okay, so I did attend the NASBA, the report I would say for the NASBA, which is B1, is that I did attend my first in-person board meeting in July with NASBA, and we did spend a lot of time evaluating not only the Western Regional discussions from that conference, but also the Eastern Regional. So there was a lot of time and discussion reviewing those events, the outcomes, and the input that was received. So what I will say is it was very fruitful discussion, a very helpful way that we also discussed the orientation process and how to improve it. There were two big items that I thought were sort of hot topic items at the conferences, and that was there was a proposal to consolidate and only have one regional meeting a year, and that was, at this point, is not moving forward unless a significant number of boards come to NASBA and request it specifically. There were a lot of pros and cons, but the one outcome is that the current plan is to continue with two regionals. And as President Savoy mentioned, the IT pathway is, that was exposed through the ED conference as well as regional committees, has just truly been identified as not being the right pathway for the profession. And so the good news is that process is continuing, and NASBA will be working with AICPA and brainstorming and coming back to figure out how to bridge the message of change is needed, but this pathway is not the change that is desired. So there is a summit meeting coming up. I don't have the date, but that is something that happens between NASBA and AICPA leadership, where they will discuss those issues further. I heard more information, more follow-up on the Reorganization Impact Task Force, which has to do with a presentation about AICPA's creation of an association with SEMA and their steps to rebrand and clarify that. And there were a couple items I would say that boards are asked for input on from NASBA. And one, NASBA is looking at the additional experience for licensure. It's come out of the regional meetings as well as the mutual recognition agreements, which are really highlighting that there's a gap between international education or national experience requirements for the attest function and the U.S. And so this board did a very extensive examination through the TEAL task force some years ago, but it might be worth considering for future board agenda to reaffirm or reevaluate this board's position on the experience, the additional experience requirement for audit or for a test authority. And then there is a question about additional experience for a firm doing a test work. So I will, I actually have incomplete notes on that, my apologies.
Mm-hmm.
I will try to figure out what that sentence meant. It was very clear to me when I wrote it down, but I'll follow up with Patty as a potential future agenda item for board consideration. Again, it would be just to give feedback to NASBA, and it could certainly take the form of a focus question. Committee bylaws meet. I chaired 3 meetings, all by phone. There are amendments to the bylaws. And they primarily relate around the nominations process and voting. So I do want to remind the board that NASBA will be voting on the bylaws at their annual event, which is coming up October 28th through the 31st in Scottsdale, Arizona. The Enforcement Resources Committee will meet in early October, and I will attend by phone. It is a meeting, and the Strategic Planning Task Force meets in person in August 28th through the 30th, but that is in Nashville, which is a no-go zone for Californians. So I will be doing my best to participate in the strategic discussions by phone. And that concludes my report.
All right, so nothing on the strategic planning or the continuing, that's all?
Well, it is that it's scheduled for
Okay.
August, but I will
Gotcha.
report after
All
my
right.
phone call.
Thank you so much for your report. We'll now break for lunch with time certain at 1:30.
Okay.
Okay. I'd like to call back this meeting, California Board of Accountancy. I'm Michael Savoy, President. We'll go around the room, take a roll call, and make sure we establish a quorum.
Alicia Burhow?
Luz Molina Lopez.
Carola Nicholson.
Kathleen Wright.
Katrina Salazar.
Mark Silverman.
George Familat.
Michael Savoy.
Sunny Youngstown Park.
Say Campos.
Okay, we have a time certain petition. I'd like to turn it over to the judge.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Matthew Goldsby. I'm the administrative law judge for the hearing. We have the petitioner present, and let's go ahead and open the record. So the hearing is now open in the matter of Michael S. Mitchell. The case number is AC 2014-11. The OAH number is 2018060456. And this is a petition before the Board of Accountancy. Today is July 26, 2018. And the hearing is being conducted in Los Angeles, California. My name is Matthew Goldsby, the administrative law judge for the hearing. Let me get appearances, please.
Yes, good afternoon, Your Honor. President and members of the board, I am Deputy Attorney General Carl Sani, appearing on this petition pursuant to Business and Professions Code, Section 5115.
Thank you. Can you state?
Appearing on behalf of the Attorney General's office, the people of the state of California.
Thank you. Sir, state and spell your name for the record, please.
Okay, my name is Michael Stephen Mitchell. That's Michael Stephen Mitchell.
All right, before we went on the record, Mr. Mitchell informed me that he's not going to be represented by counsel today. So let me explain to you how the hearing proceeds so you understand what to expect. Basically, what's going to happen is I'm going to have the agents, Mr. Sani, give a brief summation of why we're here. I'm then going to give you an opportunity to present evidence, and evidence can be presented in a couple of ways. You can testify. If you have any witnesses, they can testify. You can present documents. After you're done presenting your evidence, then I'm going to give the Deputy Attorney General and all the members of the board an opportunity to ask you some questions. And any documents that you've brought here today have to be evidentiary. They have to be admissible pursuant to the rules of evidence. So there may be some objection as to any documents that you have brought. When you're done, when the board is done with their questions, then we'll go to the final stage of the hearing, which will be closing argument. I'm going to give both of you an opportunity to give any points and authorities and argument that support your position, and then that will pretty much conclude the hearing. Then we're going to empty the room out. The board will go into closed session and deliberate. The process can take a few months before you get a final decision, so it's important that if you move or change your residence, that you file a change of address with the board. It's also important that you file it with my agency. I work for the Office of Administrative Hearings, not with the Board of Accountancy. The reason being, if you don't agree with the final decision, you do have recourse, but it's time sensitive, and if there's delays getting mailed to you, then your rights could be prejudiced. Do you have any questions about the procedures?
No, I don't.
All right. Mr. Sani, did you want to make an opening statement?
Certainly, Your Honor. First of all, I would like to mark for identification and offer into evidence as Exhibit 1 the petition packet that accompanies Mr. Franzella's memorandum of June 25th. The packet contains the petition with attachments. That's at pages 5 to 36. The underlying accusation at pages PET 47 to 57. The December 2nd, 2014 decision and order on the accusation, which is at pages 38 to 57. And it culminates with the license history of the petitioner, which is found at pages 58 and 59. The petition includes, among other documents, 2 letters of recommendation and documentation of continuing education that Mr. Mitchell has taken. I believe the board members and the petitioner have been provided a copy of this same exhibit. Again, it totals 59 pages, and I'm just going to refer to the document and page number by PET, followed by the page number as I go on. Mr. Mitchell received his certificate number 20146 way back in April 26, 1974. That's found in the license history at pages 58 and 59. His license was thereafter revoked, and the revocation was stayed while his license was placed on 3 years probation, subject to various terms and conditions, by the CBA effective on January 1st, 2015. As part of the stipulated settlement, there was a separate order in his stipulation which permanently restricted Mr. Mitchell from performing audits, reviews, compilations, or other test engagements for the remainder of his career, and that's found on pages 44 and 45. The cause for discipline in this case arose from respondents' unprofessional conduct. That's described in detail both in the underlying accusation that I've referred to before and Mr. Franzola's June 25th memorandum at pages 1 to 3. Rather than recite all those matters, I would simply refer the board members to Mr. Franzola's memorandum and to the underlying accusation. He engaged in gross and repeated acts of negligence in connection with a DOL audit, made false statements to the CBA, and failed to enroll in peer review. Attached to the petition are continuing education worksheets, many of which deal with the subject of accounting and auditing, and again, the 2 references from his employer, which I will have questions about. Mr. Mitchell fully repaid the CBA for its costs of enforcement, ordered in its decision. Again, the petition before the board is actually twofold. This is actually 2 petitions wrapped up in this hearing. The first petition is to terminate probation, and the basis of that is that 3 years have passed since he was placed on probation, and because Mr. Mitchell has been out of the state of California, under the terms of the stipulation, that has told, that is, it stopped the time from running on his time for probation, which would have already run. The second component is the challenge or ask the board to remove the second order that was imposed upon Mr. Mitchell, and that is the permanent restriction from his performing a test engagements. So we will be dealing with those matters separately in my questioning. Your Honor, maybe we have the witness sworn in.
Yes, Mr. Mitchell, let me have you raise your right hand to be sworn. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you give here today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right. First, let me ask you, have you received and reviewed the package that Mr. Sani was describing?
Yes, I have.
All right, I am marking it as Exhibit A collectively, and I'm going to admit it into evidence. We want to hear from you now. And I'm going to have you testify in narrative style, meaning you can tell the board whatever it is you think is important to support your petition in whatever order you want to go in.
Okay.
Let me ask preliminary, have you brought any documents to present to the board?
The only documents to present to the board were the ones that were just presented to the board.
They're all attached to your petition?
Yes.
All right. So go ahead and address the board, give us your statement, and when you're done, then we're going to go around the room, and Mr. Sani might have some questions for you as well as the other board members.
Okay. Let me see, where do I start? I graduated in January of 1972, went to work for Main LaFrentz and Company, which at the time was number 11 national firm. Our managing partner in New York was Leroy Layton, who at the time was president of the AICPA. We had rigorous training, and we were taught to be professionals. I worked for that firm for 3 years. Then I was controller of a New York Stock Exchange, California operations of a New York Stock Exchange company for 1 year. And then in 1976, I opened up my practice. And for several years, I prided myself in my professionalism and my competency. Somewhere along the line, and can't tell you when, and I can't tell you why, I got lazy, I got complacent, I started doing online CPE courses at the end of the 2-year period. We're basically not learning anything, and I became unprofessional. And the result of me being unprofessional is the revocation of my license that happened. I had sold, when I got the notice from the Department of Labor, I had merged my practice in with a larger firm. And then I got the notice. And so I sent my work papers to the Department of Labor. They didn't like them, and I can tell you that they should not have liked them. And then I asked the lady at the Department of Labor, can I redo this audit? Because I didn't want my client to be damaged. Because the disallowance of the $5,500 would have been devastating. So I redid the audit, and I think I did a pretty darn good job of it. And I did it under my own sole proprietor rather than the firm I had merged with. That, by the way, is the audit that somehow made me subject to peer review. And I don't know how that happened, because I had said I wasn't going to do any audits anymore, that all the audits were going to be done by with the firm that I merged with. But somehow I was subject to peer review. And when I filled out the peer review document, I put on there, I'm not going to do any audits anymore. Somehow that was construed as making false statements to the board. And I don't believe I was making false statements. In any event, I worked with the firm that I merged with for a few years, and then I decided I wanted to go out. I was devastated. I was despondent, depressed, because I had once upon a time been a very good professional CPA, and I became a bad one. So I decided, I married a Mexican lady, and I moved to San Luis Rio, Colorado, in Sonora, Mexico, which is 20 miles south of Yuma. And then I started looking in Yuma for what I thought would be the best CPA firm in Yuma that does audits, to get hired and get retrained and get back to the feeling like I was a professional, competent CPA again. And the firm I ended up with was Turkles & Smith and Snell at the time, which my research was correct. It turned out to be the best firm in Yuma. They're peer reviewed by both the California and Arizona. And I went to work for them in August of 2014. And I told the partners when they interviewed me, I told them completely about my situation. And I asked them to help me get my competency back. And they said, they actually trusted me, and we gave it a shot. I started going to Walter Haig courses instead of doing online. I did a lot of research, and I came to the conclusion Walter Haig was probably the best teacher for a CPA that wants to get back in the competency to go see, because he's pretty strict. And I worked on lots of audits and reviews and compilations for the firm under the supervision of the partners. I started out like a staff accountant role, doing cash and property and equipment, just like when I started in 1972. And then I came back up. I believe that I have rehabilitated myself, and that I'm competent again as a competent professional CPA. So I'm requesting two things: that to count my period of non-residency of California resident as towards the 3 years of probation. By the way, I was a non-resident of California when I signed when I did the stipulated settlement. And I'm asking to waive the restriction for not doing the test functions for the rest of my career. That, by the way, that was my idea. I asked for that because I didn't want to be able to do them until I felt I was back and competent and ready to go. I'm ready for questions.
All right, Mr. Sane, do you have questions?
Yes, Mr. Mitchell. A point of clarification, we're not here really to revisit the past, but you may have one comment that I thought maybe you can clarify. You mentioned that you did a DOL audit and you got a notice from them that the audit was not satisfactory, and you redid it, correct?
That is correct.
And on page 10 of your petition, it says, it says, I was fully aware that this would cause my client's 5500 form to be rejected by the Department of Labor and that they would be subject to substantial penalties. In order to hold my client harmless from my negligence, I hired and paid another CPA firm to perform another audit, which was accepted by the Department of Labor. Are these statements about the same audit?
Well, yeah, it's about the same audit. I did the original audit, which believe me was negligent. I merged my practice with another practice. Then I started dealing with the Department of Labor, got the notices and everything. Then I redid that audit. I think I did a good job, but they didn't accept it. So then I hired another CPA firm, the firm I had merged with, but I paid them out of my pocket to do that audit. I did not want my client to be harmed. It's just...
Fair enough. Thank you.
Mr. Sani, let me just interrupt because I'm realizing I neglected to swear in Mr. Mitchell.
No.
I got a little distracted. Did I swear him in?
Yeah, you swore him in.
Yeah, you did.
I've been told that I hadn't, so
No.
I want to make sure that you were under oath.
You're good.
Okay. Then let's proceed.
I can't hear you very good.
You can't hear me?
I can now.
Okay.
Okay.
I interrupted because I thought I hadn't sworn you in, but now I'm being
Now
told
you
that I
swore
did.
me in.
Okay.
You swore him in.
It's a fear I have with every hearing I do.
Well, as long as I don't let him go before
I
doing it.
I
but,
have a
let's
note in
proceed.
big red that says, swear in witness if not already done so. Mr. Mitchell, in response to question number 7, you mentioned that the Deputy Attorney General that you worked with told you that you could petition for termination of probation, but he did not make any representations regarding removing the restricted practice condition. Is that correct?
Well, he said I could petition to have that done, but he didn't make any representation that it would be done.
Okay. And
But he said that that was standard practice, that you have to be a resident of the state of California for the probation period to run.
okay, and you're aware that the agreement you signed disclaimed any verbal engagements you may have had with anybody about the terms of the agreement, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, in the last 4 years, you've been working for the firm that is now Frost LLC, correct?
Yes.
How many audits have you worked on since your probation began?
Seven or eight.
Okay? And how many hours do you think you have spent working on those engagements? Total hours, would you estimate?
1,000 to 1,500, that's a guess.
So these were substantial,
They were large audits.
okay? And what was your position in the firm, your function position? Staff, senior manager?
Well, I had my title on the firm, my title is senior manager, but on those beginning audits, I was a staff accountant.
Okay.
I started over.
And you were actively supervised while you were working on these audits?
Yes, because I needed to learn all this expectation thing and all the new stuff. It's just it's all new.
Okay. And how many reviews and compilations did you work on in the last 4 years since your probation began?
Probably 10.
And how many total hours would you estimate you billed on those matters?
Again, like 1,000 to 1,500. I can't, I'm guessing.
Okay, so roughly 2,500 hours in attest engagements, compilations, reviews, and audits during the last 4 years?
Yeah, but thereabouts, and then the rest tax. My time has been like 40% attest and 60% tax.
Okay. And your firm is peer reviewed?
Yes.
Is that correct? Yeah. You plan to apply for an Arizona CPA license?
Yes, I did.
You have applied already?
I applied right away, but they turned me down. So.
What was the reason? Again, that wasn't in your petition. Was that because of the CBA's action?
Yes.
Did they give you any other reasons?
No, they said that until I was off of probation with California, that they would not give me an Arizona license.
Okay. Now you.
So I do not call myself a CPA in Arizona, because it's against the law.
All right. Now you have 2 letters of recommendation from partners at the Frost firm, correct?
Yes.
And they're found on pages PET 11 and PET 12, correct?
Yes.
And they mentioned that during the time you've worked there, that you have studied the standards of our profession and applied his studies to his work. Can you tell me what, in addition to actually doing audit reviews and compilations, what have you done to additionally study?
Well, like I said, I've been taking a lot of continuing education courses from Walter Haig. I find him to be the best. So the combination of actually working on the job, using the checklists of Knowledge Coach, and the classroom education from Walter Haig it's been a combination of those things.
Okay, and the partners that you have worked for in these audit reviews and compilations, are they in fact Mr. Tim Turkelson and Carol Smith?
Yes, sir.
Any other partners that you've worked for in audit or tax, or excuse me, audit compilations?
Well, not worked for directly. Since we merged with Frost and our headquarters is in Little Rock, Arkansas now, there's been a few partners in Little Rock that have looked at the work, but I'm directly supervised by the partners in Yuma.
And have you, if I can ask, received satisfactory performance reviews?
Yes, sir.
And you continue to be employed by the firm, correct?
Yes, sir.
No further questions at this time?
All right, then we're going to go around and see if any board members have any questions. Ms. Burhow, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Ms. Molina Lopez, do you have any questions?
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
It's in regards to the audit that you performed on the employee benefit plan. What amount of time lapsed between the time that you performed the second audit, as far as I understand, and then when you hired the other firm to complete the work? What time?
Well, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was pretty quick. I did the second audit hoping that the Department of Labor would accept it. And they did not. So then I hired the firm that I had merged with. I paid them out of my pocket to do the audit. And as soon as I got the notice from the Department of Labor that they were not going to accept the second audit, I went to the managing partner of the firm I had merged with and set the second audit in motion. But I can't tell you the dates. I don't remember.
And then one last question. With regards to your employer now, why do you believe that they decided to hire you despite knowing of the issues that you were having with the CBA?
I interviewed with them and I was honest with them. I think that was good that I was honest with them. I didn't hide the fact that I was being investigated by the California Board of Accountants. I had not reached the stipulated settlement yet. Okay, I was dealing with the Deputy Attorney General at the time. And so, but I wanted to be honest. And they liked that I had a lot of years of experience, and it's hard to find good CPAs in Yuma. So it's a combination of those things.
Thank you.
All right, let's continue on. Ms. Nicholson, do you have any questions?
I have a quick question. What was the reason that the Department of Labor did not accept your second audit?
They didn't tell me. It just, I did, the first audit, I didn't do anything right. I didn't have any checklists, but I did all the checklists. I tested the transactions. I did everything. But I did everything assuming that they would not accept it, because they didn't accept the first one, and they rightfully didn't accept the first one. But they didn't give me a reason. They just said it's unacceptable.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Wright, do you have any questions?
Yeah, excuse me, yes, I do, thank you. If we restore your license and then you're able to get an Arizona license, or you decide to come back to California, whatever, would you be planning then to go back out on your own, or would you be planning to stay in the environment of a firm?
I don't want to ever go out on my own again. I just don't. Everything's too complicated nowadays.
I agree.
And right now, I'm doing the work that I love to do, taxes and auditing and review and compilations. And I don't have the administrative work that I used to hate to do when I had my own practice. So I'm a happy camper. I don't have any reason to go out on my own again. I would like to have my CPA license fully restored for it's a pride thing for me, because I've tried to get competent again. It's not to go out and start my own practice. Now, they might offer me a partnership. I don't think so, because I'm old, but.
Thank you for that, for clarifying that. One last question, and this is kind of open-ended, and I understand a bit ambiguous, but have you developed any framework within your own analysis of your task that you're assigned, the work that they give you to do, to try to evaluate whether or not you have the competency level to address the questions that are raised by whatever assignment you're given? I mean, has the experience allowed you to develop a line, so to speak? This, I know what I'm doing.
Oh, yes.
I think I've stepped over the line.
I mean, I've done it step by step by step. It's like I was starting all over again. I've learned a lot from the Knowledge Coach checklist, because they go right into everything that you, I mean, it's great stuff. But I believe that I'm competent again, but what's more important to me is the people I work for believe that also.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Katrina Salazar, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Let's turn to Mr. George Familet. Do you have any questions?
Mr. Silver.
Mr. Silverman,
There's
here,
no
Judge.
Familet. Okay. This has been, that's Mr. Silverman at the
Yes,
end?
that's me. And this is Mr. Familet.
And you have no question?
I just have one quick question.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Mitchell, just for clarification, have there been any recent developments on the possibility of your coming back to California and being part of the office opening in the state?
Frost has talked about either opening an office in Salinas, California, or merging with a firm in Salinas, California. I don't know if I would go there or not. I'm pretty happy in Yuma, but there's always a possibility that I just don't want to go out on my own again. It's too complicated.
Thank you. All right, now we'll turn to Mr. Familet.
Mr. Mitchell, in terms of your current practice, it sounds like you're doing audits, compilations, and tax work. So do you anticipate, if you were to be granted your license back, that you would continue with the same type of mix of work, or would there be any differences that you would foresee in the future?
It all depends on what Frost decides to do with me. We merged with we were a local firm, a large local firm, and we merged with a medium-sized national firm. And there's some changes going on. So they're talking about somebody should be only tax or only a test, and I don't know which one I would end up being in, but it's.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's go to President Michael Savoy. Do you have any questions?
Yes. At the firm you're now working for, are there other individuals beside partners that sign financial statements or tax returns?
Only the partners sign financial statements and tax returns.
All right,
That's it.
so you can get your license back and not the attest part of it.
Right.
If you're not signing financial statements.
Right.
And only if you went out on your own would that be a concern.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
No questions.
Then for the record, that Sunny Youngson Park has no questions? Okay. Let's turn to Jose Campos. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, what's the nature of the audits you've worked on? So the problem audit was a benefit plan, DOL audit. What are you working on those same kinds of audits, or are they other?
I refuse to go near a Department of Labor audit right now. I told them I didn't want to have anything to do with them. They do several of them because we're the only firm in Yuma that does audits. But I've worked on mostly large agriculture companies, large farming companies. I worked on an audit of a large international, it's a chemical company. They do pesticide and insecticide and herbicide and seed, everything to do, and they're worldwide. Their sales the year I worked on the audit was $500 million. So, and then several large farms. Yuma's agriculture capital of Arizona. Those farmers are making some money.
In terms of your role, so you mentioned you were a staff is it on all of these engagements you've operated as staff? You said your title's a senior manager, or did you actually have the manager responsibility on any of the audits?
I have lately. They think that I have the competency to have the manager responsibility now.
Okay. And then the concept of removing the restriction on attest work. So if you remained in Yuma, you would still be unable to sign any audit reports in Arizona.
Well, I would be unable to sign audit reports anywhere. I mean, I don't, okay, repeat the question. Maybe I don't understand it.
Yeah, so you're asking to receive or remove the restriction of practice from your terms that you previously agreed to. Presumably, that would put you in a position to be able to sign audit reports.
Yes.
But should you remain, I mean, that would only work, I guess, if you're coming to California and doing that here. If you remained in Arizona, you would be unable, with your existing firm in that location, unless you had an Arizona license
Right.
to sign reports there. Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Sani, do you have any further questions before we turn to closing argument?
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, you want to make a summation?
Certainly. As indicated in my opening, there are two issues before the board. One is to terminate probation by giving Mr. Mitchell relief from the provision that tolls the period of probation when he is out of state. And that's entrusted to the board's discretion. The burden of proof is on Mr. Mitchell. He's given explanations that he has not been deliberately avoiding California, has been gainfully employed in the accounting profession in another state. So there is reason, serious consideration can be given to that, that part of the petition. The other part of the petition deals with termination of or elimination of the restricted practice condition. And that provision, as some of the board members may recognize, has been employed for a number of years. And I think 2 or 3 years ago, it was codified by the legislature in section 5100.5. The purpose that the section serves is to allow a practitioner to continue to gain and retain employment as an accountant, even if they may not be competent to practice in an area of attest engagements, for example. And that provision is designed as written in this stipulation to be permanent, but obviously a petitioner has an option of petitioning the board at any time to have that restriction lifted. So the question naturally arises is, how do you go about evaluating whether or not a satisfactory burden of proof has been met? And as I was thinking on this, again, I'm making no recommendation as to either order, but at least analytically, one can look at the problem faced by the restricted practice order as ensuring that the public is not harmed by someone even after the termination of probation who could endanger the public in their accounting work when he could not likely get corrected or rehabilitated during the period of probation. You can imagine solo practitioners who have a restricted practice term placed on their license. It would be perhaps somewhat challenging for them to get relief from that term because there's no one really monitoring them during the period of probation and afterwards that would give sufficient assurance to the public that the public is in fact being protected. What is interesting about Mr. Mitchell's petition is that despite the fact that I'm probably more of your generation, Mr. Mitchell, is that having been out in the world a long time, he has agreed to perform at a staff level, effectively, or manager level at a firm in order to continue to develop expertise and competency in the area of attest engagements. And the letters we have from both of the partners, apparently the only partners who supervise him in this area, are certainly positive. Both of them attest that he has developed competency, and they recommend that the restriction be lifted, and they both give those recommendations under penalty of perjury. Perhaps the board could have wanted to see more detail in the letters. Nevertheless, Mr. Mitchell has provided detail about the number of hours he has spent, which is not inconsiderable. So all those are, to me, the factors that would bear some scrutiny by the board in its consideration whether to grant or deny that restricted practice condition, which is the fact that he has been supervised for a period of now 4 years in the performance of these types of engagements. And so it's something that I would suggest may set him apart from what we might think of as a typical petitioner who's seeking relief from this term. So other than those comments and thoughts, which are just my thoughts, I would not ascribe them too much to our Attorney General, but just my thoughts on having seen this provision develop over the years that would warrant some serious consideration. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Mitchell, is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
I think I've said everything that I pretty much need to say. I feel I'm competent, and I would like to have full practice privilege again.
All right, with that, the matter will be concluded, and the board will go into deliberations. So the hearing is now concluded. Thank you. All right, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, back from closed session. We'd like to get through the last two agenda items, or 3 items, and then we'll go into closed session on the pink sheets. Let's talk about the committee meetings from this morning. So let's do the ledge first.
Thank you very much. My name is Katrina Salazar. Am I on? Good? I guess so. Oh, there we go.
There you go.
So I'm filling in as acting chair for Sochi Leon. There was a committee meeting earlier today, and this is the report. The bulk of the work was to consider Assembly and Senate bills for which no action was taken, but part of the process of presenting the committee operations is to review those. So we'll call out where an action is needed, but most of this is more of a recap. So the first item is Assembly Bill 767, the GoBiz Information Technology. So staff reported that this bill was amended and would establish the Information Technology Unit within the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, and that's for the purpose of using technology as an outreach and service delivery method. So staff reached out to the author's office, and it was confirmed this bill will not impact the California Board of Accountancy. So the July 2nd amendments are minor, and staff suggested that the committee maintain its watch position, and the committee did not take any action on this.
Moving to the next item, Assembly Bill 2087 for state government operations and technology modernization. The Legislative Committee did not take action on this item. We were updated that the bill was amended and would now require each state agency to establish modernization goals by January 2020. The next bill is Assembly Bill 2138. The committee did not take action on this item. However, it is worth noting that staff continued its participation in lobbying the board's position on this bill by attending various meetings, testifying at legislative committee hearings, and providing feedback to the authors and other stakeholders. Staff reported that on June 20th, 2018, amendments to Assembly Bill 2138 were a positive development. There were still concerning provisions remaining within this legislation or this bill. So staff stated that approximately 20 Department of Consumer Affairs boards and bureaus have taken an oppose or oppose unless amended position. And it was noted that although DCA has not taken a position, its Deputy Director of Legislative Affairs commended the CBA's efforts on this bill. So earlier this month, the Center for Public Interest Law also took an oppose unless amended position on this bill, and that information was provided in the materials, or that copy of that letter. As of the July California Board of Accountancy meeting, this is the last regularly scheduled meeting before the legislature adjourns in August of 2018. Staff may request at a later date that this board call a special meeting to discuss any possible amendments and changes position on the bill. So staff will continue working with the author's office and stakeholders to continue to advocate for changes in the areas previously expressed by the committee and adopted by the Board of Accountancy. So at this point, the committee has continued its oppose unless amended position, and no action is requested by our committee. The next item is Assembly Bill 2483, which is the indemnification of public officers and employees related to antitrust awards. Staff reported that this missed the legislative deadline and will not move forward, so the committee recommends that the California Board of Accountancy discontinue following AB 2483, and that would be presented to this board as a fully formed motion. Would you like to handle it or defer that to the end of my report?
No, we can deal with that right now. So we have a fully formed motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Is there any public comments? Call for a vote.
Alicia Burhow?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
George Famila?
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez?
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson?
Yes.
Sunny Yansan Park?
Yes.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Mark Silverman?
Yes.
And Kathleen Wright?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes unanimously. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Savoy. The next item is Assembly Bill 2958, which is state bodies, meetings, and teleconferences. Staff reported that this Assembly Bill was amended to change the requirement to adopt teleconferencing regulations to be guidelines. Staff has reached out to the author's office and was informed the bill would be amended in August, so we're expecting significant changes. So according to the author, these provisions within the bill are meant to be permissive and would allow alternate teleconference requirements. Staff analysis noted some concerns with the possible amendments, so at this point I would like to invite Mr. Bone to briefly elaborate on those.
Thank you, Ms. Salazar and Mr. President. Staff just simply wish to highlight to the members the possible amendments that the author's office had shared with us. As indicated in the analysis, due to your staff's proactive communication with the legislature, we have today the unusual opportunity to provide input to the author's office on these possible amendments. And with your indulgence, I'd like to spend a moment talking about them as well as some staff concerns, if that would suit the board. It's on page 3 of 4 for the analysis for AB 2958. And one of these, again, we're speaking about this alternate pathway that the bill envisions for boards who wish to follow through with these other requirements to hold a teleconference meeting. The first one would be at least 24 hours prior to the meeting that advisory bodies shall provide notice to the public that identifies which members are participating remotely. It also indicates that the location of that member physically where they would be during the meeting need not be disclosed. And staff's concern that there's this public's lack of awareness of the physical location may not be consistent with our transparency laws as they exist right now with that key. The second possible amendment is that any member that participates remotely would not count towards establishing a quorum. And as you can imagine, staff have a concern that could interfere with, our ability to create policies and implement them and fulfill our mission. Next, if a member of one of these bodies participates remotely, that the body must provide means by which the public can observe audio of the meeting and address the body remotely. That could, one, raise costs. As we may not know, we could be here at a hotel and we'd have to work with the location provider to set up a conference, as well as controlling the public's involvement and participation through a teleconference could pose some challenges. Lastly, if remote access fails during the meeting due to technical difficulties, then the meeting would end, or at least be put on pause until those technical difficulties could be resolved. And then there would be some other notice requirements through a phone line or a website or email to those participants or those who have requested information. Right now, under current law, if our webcast goes down, we can continue to proceed with our meeting and board business would not be interrupted. But under these alternate procedures, the CBA would have to delay or possibly even cancel a meeting if we have technical difficulties. So, Mr. President, we just wanted to elevate these concerns as well as these possible amendments. And if the board wished to weigh in on that, perhaps through a letter, it wouldn't necessarily require the board adopting a new position, although they could so if they wish, but also could send a letter indicating however it feels about some of these possible amendments.
So to add to Mr. Bone's presentation, just a reminder that we currently have a position of watch on this, and no letter has been sent to date.
Yes.
Is that correct? Yes.
Yeah. We don't typically do that on
On a watch.
On a watch.
watch positions.
So a letter's been sent with our concerns, correct? Is that?
It hasn't been sent.
It has not been
Has
sent.
not been sent.
Okay.
So, because these, Ms. Burhow, these are possible amendments that the author's office has shared with us. And that's because the staff have been very proactive in our
Okay.
communication with them, and they kind of tipped their hand that these sorts of changes may be coming.
Okay.
And it coincided with our board meeting, and we thought, well, this is a great opportunity to present that to the board, so if you decided to weigh in on them, we could do so.
Yeah, I mean, I think, given these issues that we have concern with, a simple letter regarding, the accountancy board just met on whatever date.
Yeah.
These are our concerns, I'd still say we can take a watch position, but just weigh in and tell them that these are things that really concern us regarding our board.
Right.
Yeah, and as it's been described to us, these are intended to be permissive, so we could continue down the current pathway as we presently operate, but that with this kind of alternate highway, so to speak, would be available to us if we chose to do so.
Could that be delegated to the president to work with staff to
Yeah, just
do a
prepare
letter?
the letter and send it to me for my signature, and beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right, thank you. So that concludes the committee report on Assembly Bill 2958. Moving along is Senate Bill 715, Department of Consumer Affairs, Regulatory Boards, and the removal of board members. So staff stated that this Senate bill would grant the governor the power to remove any member of a DCA board appointed by the governor. It hasn't been amended since the last meeting, and so staff has recommended that the committee maintain its support position, and so no action was taken on this item. The next bill considered was Senate Bill 795, Accountancy Practice Privileges. So staff reported that this Senate bill was amended to include changes requested by the Board of Accountancy in its support if amended letter. Because those amendments satisfy the board's request, CBA now has a support position on Senate Bill 795. So remember, when we give the letters opposed unless amended, then when those changes are wrapped in, it becomes an automatic position change. So this bill is scheduled to be heard in the Assembly Appropriations Committee on August 8th, 2018. And staff recommended that we maintain our support position, so no action was taken. The next item is Senate Bill 984, State Boards and Commissions, Representation and Appointments. So staff reported that this Senate bill was amended to clarify the term woman to mean an individual who self-identifies her gender as a woman and delays the effective date of requirements to have a certain number of women board members until January 2024. So the effective date has been pushed out. There's been a clarification regarding self-identification, and it was requested that the staff contact the author's office to get additional information regarding the reason behind the change in effective date. It wasn't a concern, it was just a question. So staff suggested that the Ledge Committee maintain its watch position, and the committee took no action on this item. Senate Bill 993, Sales and Use Taxes, Service Tax Qualified Business. Staff reported that this Senate bill was amended and would, starting January 1st, 2020, impose up to a 3% tax on services and reduce the statewide base sales and use tax rate up to 2%. It doesn't have an impact on the board's mission of consumer protection. However, it would broaden the tax base by imposing a sales tax on services, including those provided by our licensees, CPAs. Staff suggested that the committee maintain its watch position, and no action was taken to change that.
With all these exceptions, this seems to affect accountants and lawyers.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay.
Right.
Do you have a motion?
Did you?
Enough said.
All right. Next bill, Senate Bill 1121, Personal Information. This was amended and would now define breach as unauthorized access, use, modification, or disclosure of personal information. It was a relatively minor amendment, and staff recommended the committee and the board maintain its watch position. The committee did not take any action to change the position on this. Senate Bill 1159, which is Accountancy Inactive License. So this Senate bill missed a legislative deadline and will not move forward. So the committee is recommending that the board discontinue following Senate Bill 1159. And it is presented as a fully formed motion to the Board of Accountancy. Mr. Savoy, did you want to vote on that?
No.
No?
No.
No, I'm actually serious. Would you like to defer the vote until the end of my presentation, or would you like to vote on it now?
No, that was my vote, but no, go ahead. Yeah, let's put it to a motion. Well, it's fully formed
It's already a
motion.
fully formed
The
motion.
motion is fully formed, and the motion is discontinue following.
Public comment. Sorry, public comment.
Any discussion, any public comment, please call for a vote.
Kathleen Wright?
Yes.
Mark Silverman?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park?
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson?
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez?
Yes.
George Pamela?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
And Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right. Thank you. We're nearing the end. I appreciate your indulgence. Senate Bill 1492, the Department of Consumer Affairs. This is our board's omnibus bill. It was amended to include the third and final proposal to amend the BPC Code Section 5100 related to conclusive evidence in the CBA's enforcement practices. The Senate bill requires additional amendments to maintain the appropriate statutory structure to Business and Profession Code Section 5100, and the legislative staff are aware of the CBA's concerns and have agreed to make the necessary amendments. And staff is suggesting that the committee maintain its support position on Senate Bill 1492, so no action was taken by the committee at this time. Okay. And that concludes at least the portion of the report that updates previously considered bills. There is a new bill.
I do have a quick question.
Yes.
Real quick, on SB 715, Was that picked up by another author, now that Senator Newman is no longer in the Senate? Sorry.
It was, yeah.
At this point, Senator Newman is still listed as the author of that
Right.
bill. As you know, he's no longer a member of the Senate. So
Right.
it doesn't happen very frequently, but
Yeah.
typically a bill will sit until it gets amended with
Okay.
with another author, if that author were to leave office for one reason or another in the middle of their term.
Okay, so is it still, so it says inactive, I'm assuming it's dead, but
Well, it's on the assembly
is it
floor.
mostly dead? No, I'm just kidding.
No, it's on pause.
Okay.
It's on the assembly floor in the
Okay.
inactive file. So it's a
Okay.
parking lot waiting for somebody to pick it up and carry it.
Okay.
And they would probably assign a new senator to be the author of that bill.
Okay.
And then do with it as they wish.
Perfect, that's all I needed, thank you.
So the next item is newly considered bills, and that is Senate Bill 930, which is financial institutions in the cannabis industry. So staff reported to the committee that this bill would establish cannabis limited charter banks and cannabis limited charter credit unions to provide limited banking services within the cannabis industry. So the bill we discussed does not directly impact the mission of the Board of Accountancy. Staff, however, recommended a watch position as it relates to the cannabis industry's financial services and therefore indirectly the accounting profession. So the committee recommends that the board take a watch position on Senate Bill 930. The committee did vote to make that recommendation, and so the recommendation to watch Senate Bill 930 comes forward to this committee as a fully formed motion.
Any
Mr. President?
discussion?
I have a
Yes.
question, why wouldn't we just go and support this? What, did the committee discuss why why a support position wasn't being taken instead of a watch?
I do not recall, Nusheen, where did she go? Someone help me out here. That was this morning. I don't recall that
Such a long
specific
time
question.
ago. Yeah.
I mean, probably because
Or
that
Mr.
last
Moon?
sentence where you say it didn't directly affect
Oh.
our role as
That was
protection
Katrina's embellishment of
there
the
you go.
printed
of
materials, but
consumer,
it,
therefore, we
Yeah.
just, we wanted to monitor and watch, but
Yeah.
is there
I
any?
was just curious.
Well, I think banking issues are not typically something that the board has probably taken a position upon in the past or historically, but I think the issue of cannabis, since it's such of a relevant issue for the licensee population, I think that's why we've brought this bill forward for the board's consideration, at least to make them aware.
Okay, all right,
Does that help?
sure, let's go with
Okay.
that.
But there was no discussion about possibly supporting the
Yeah.
bill in the committee.
No, I
in that
just
aspect.
watching our CPA, Fiona Ma, our Board of Equalization. She's been pushing this really hard with Senator Hertzberg. So I'm just curious. That's why I was curious why it hadn't really been thought about as a support position, but I'll go along with it.
Any other board discussion, any public discussion? Yes.
I do have a question. Did either of those authors reach out to the Board of Accountancy
Oh, that's a good
specifically
question.
to the staff to request a position?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Interesting, okay.
All right.
Call for a vote, please.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
George Family,
Abstain.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson,
Yes.
and Sunny Yunsun Park.
Yes.
Motion carries.
So, and with that, there was a written report updating legislation the board is monitoring, and there were no additional legislative items slated for the next meeting or for future meetings.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for stepping in today. We'll have a report on CPC by Mr. Fennell.
Yes, today, in terms of the CPC, there was a discussion and possible action to obtain authority for the CBA to require licensees residing outside of the United States and its territories to provide a valid and current email and telephone number. As part of the sunset review process, the legislature has required that the CBA identify current issues in its sunset review report that may require legislative proposal. By highlighting this issue in its sunset review report, the CBA has the opportunity to include a legislative proposal in the Sunset Review bill. The CPC members discussed this matter and were advised by legal counsel to consider requiring email addresses from all licensees, not just those residing outside of the United States. The CPC recommends that the CBA direct staff to include legislative language in its Sunset Review report requiring email addresses from all licensees.
Fully formed motion and second. Any discussion on this? Public? Yes.
Could you just repeat that really quick? So it's from all licensees, not specific out of country?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I mean, they originally brought it up as specific, but we also then learned that presently it's not required, so we thought of kind of bundling it all in there, so.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just want to make sure I heard it right.
Any other further discussion, any public discussion, comments? Call for a vote, please.
Sunny Youngsun Park.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Mark Silverman.
Yes.
Kathleen Wright.
Yes?
Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
George Familet.
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Yes.
And Carola Nicholson.
Yes.
Motion carries. So skipping to item 13, closing business. Is there any public comments? Do we have any items for future agenda? Yes.
I have two items that were from prior meetings that we haven't addressed, but I assume they're on a list somewhere for future agenda.
Yes, they are, or you want to
If you could
repeat
just
it?
state them just to make sure, but
I'd be glad to. The first one was to have the members of the board, certainly myself, better understand our overall goal, and I think this fits well under the umbrella of the strategic plan. I certainly understand protection of the consumer is the overall goal, but also I would like us to consider and possibly add service to licensees as also a goal. And where that fits in, and I'm repeating myself, maybe the strategic plan is the vehicle for that. Secondly, at our last meeting, I can't recall the detail, we had something come up related to contingent fees. I think it was a pink sheet item. And I had asked for staff to take a look at and explain why CBA's rules on charging a contingent fee were different from AICPA and Circular 240.
yes, I do have that on that list of future agenda items.
Thank you. Any else? Okay. We now adjourn and go into closed session to deal with enforcement issues. Thank you.
There's a whole bunch, but a lot of them are direct. It's like, I don't want to take
We're
4
back?
hours.
Okay. All right, back in session. Thank you all for participating. What was a 2-day meeting got finished in a day. Enjoy your long weekend and see you all in September. Thank you.